The Dreeg had a game, and Kest had learned long ago that the safest thing to do while they played it was to keep his eyes on the manifest and his skin from changing color. He failed at the second part before the first scream even finished. It came up out of the market row below the harbor office, high and thin and wet, the sound a cella made when something inside it had been made to bend the wrong way. Kest's modeling bloomed pale gray down both arms, an ugly involuntary tide of stress color he could not stop, and he pressed the flat of one limb against the console to hide it. Through the long glass of the office he could see the whole low sprawl of the Sump, the dug-in transfer depot squatting under its dome of scarred plate, the mining moon Lud turning slow and rust-colored beyond it. And down in the produce lane, 4 of the Dreeg had cornered the little grower against his own stall. They were laughing. That was the part that never stopped being wrong. The Dreeg did not laugh the way most species laughed, with air. They laughed with their crests, the high bony fans along their skulls flushing a hot arterial orange, snapping erect and folding flat again in fast ripples, and the effect at a distance was of 4 broad ash-gray bodies bristling with slow fire while a small translucent creature came apart between them. Zeph. Kest knew the grower's name because he logged Seph's water allotment every cycle, and because Seph, alone among everything that lived on the Sump, had once brought a warm route up 3 flights to the harbor office for no reason at all except that Kest had looked tired. The clerk had not known what to do with the gift. He still had the dried husk of it in a drawer. Now the Dreeg had Seph's forelimb pinned flat to the stall board, and the big one Daxes, the second fist, Kest knew all their names too, that was his curse, leaned his whole weight down through one gauntleted hand and turned the limb until the delicate cartilage under Seph's skin folded, and Seph made the sound again. Higher, Daxes said, conversational, come on. You can go higher than that. The other 3 watched with the loose, satisfied attention of soldiers off duty. One of them was eating. That detail would stay with Kest a long time. The way the Dreeg named Bruck stood there working something stringy in his back teeth, jaw rolling, entirely at ease, while beside him his crewmate broke a farmer for the pitch of the noise it made. Nobody in the market moved. A vetch trader had gone very still behind his crates. 2 Amet dock hands, Kest's own kind, had found urgent reasons to face the other way, their skins gone the same coward gray as his. This was how it worked on the Sump. The Dreeg crew, Clan V. Harkle, the Redcrests, 40-odd of them berthed in the long hauler that had settled onto the pad 6 lunar months ago and simply never left. The Dreeg did what they liked, and everyone else practiced not seeing it. That was the arrangement. Nobody had signed it. Nobody had to. Kest's fingers hovered over the incident field on the manifest. There was a protocol. There was always a protocol. He could log it. Minor dispute, market row, no assets damaged. He could file it clean and let the record swallow it whole, the way he had swallowed 100 cycles of small cruelties, and by the next shift it would be nothing, a line no one would ever read. He was reaching to do exactly that when the human came into the row. She came from the pump side airlock, still in the gray coverall of the deep heat crew, sleeves shoved to the elbow, a coil of feed line slung over one shoulder because she had walked straight off a job. She was small. That was the first thing anyone ever noticed about the humans and the last thing anyone should have trusted. This one barely came to Daxes's ribs. Dark hair cropped rough and uneven, a smear of pump grease along one cheekbone, a thin old scratch healed white above her jaw. Nothing about her registered as a threat to any instrument Kest owned. He knew her too, of course. Wren, the others called her. She and the grower were always together in the off shift, the small human and the smaller Sella, sharing the bench outside the waterhouse, saying nothing much, the way creatures did when the silence between them was already full. She did not run. She did not shout. Kest had time to think that a sensible creature would have done one of those 2 things, and then the human was simply there among the Dreeg, crouching at Seph's side, and the row had gone quiet enough that Kest could hear, through the tinny office pickup, the small sound the grower made when it recognized her. "Hey," she said to Seth, low, even. "Hey, I've got you." Daxus had not let go of the pinned limb. He looked down at the top of the human's head with the mild interest of someone who has found a new thing to break. "This one's yours," he said. Ren did not look up. Her hands were moving over Seth, the fold in the forelimb, the place where the cartilage had gone wrong, reading the damage the way Kest had seen the deep heat crews read a cracked feed coupling, by touch, without drama. "Let go of him," she said. "He owed a toll," Daxus said. "Market toll, everyone pays the toll." His crest gave a lazy orange ripple. "He was short. So we're taking it out in," he searched for the human word, found it, savored it, entertainment. "Let go of him," Ren said again. Exactly the same, not louder. She still had not looked up. And here was the thing Kest would try for the rest of his life to explain to people who had not been there. The human's voice did not change. There was no heat in it. On the Sump, when you were about to be hurt and knew it, your voice climbed, everyone's did, Amat and Vetch and Sella alike, the pitch of a thing that wants to live. The human's voice went the other way. It flattened. It got quieter and more precise. The way a gauge gets precise as it nears the red, and something very old in Kest's hindbrain, some instinct that predated his people's cities and their careful gray civilization, sat up cold and told him to get away from the glass. Daxus, who did not have that instinct, or had it and had spent his whole life being rewarded for ignoring it, laughed his fire laugh and let go of Seth, not because he was told to, but to free his hand. He hit the human across the face with the back of his gauntlet. It was a casual blow, an afterthought, the kind of strike a Dreeg gave a subordinate to move it along. It knocked Ren sideways off her heels and opened the old white scratch on her jaw into a fresh red line, and she went down onto one hand in the grit of the market floor. The row held its breath. Kest's skin had gone the pale of ash. He waited for the pitch to climb, the human sound, the wet high thing, the sound that said the arrangement was intact and the Dreeg had won again. It didn't come. The human knelt there a moment with her hand flat on the floor and her head down, and blood ran off her jaw and fell one drop at a time onto the grit. And Kest watched her breathe, once, slow, all the way in and all the way out like a diver, and then she lifted her head and looked at Daxus, and she smiled. It was a small smile. It did not reach anything. It was the worst thing Kest had ever seen a face do, and he had watched Dreeg pull the crests off their own defeated rivals as trophies. The human smiled up at the thing that had hit her the way you might smile at a piece of work that had just, finally, told you exactly how much it was going to cost. "Okay," she said. Then she gathered up her friend, lifted the broken little grower against her chest, with a gentleness that had nothing to do with the smile still sitting on her face, and stood, and turned her back on four-armed Dreeg as though they were furniture, and walked out of the row toward the medical bay. She did not hurry. That was the second detail that would keep Kest awake. She had a broken creature in her arms and blood on her collar, and four of the deadliest things on the Sump at her back, and she walked out of that market at the pace of a person who has decided something and is in no rush at all, because the thing she has decided is not going anywhere. Behind her the Dreeg laughed, and Daxus called something after her about the toll, and the crests flared their satisfied orange, and the arrangement, as far as they were concerned, held. Kest looked down at the incident field on his manifest. His limb was shaking. After a while he closed the field without filing anything, which was not protocol, and which he had never once done in 11 years of keeping the Sump's records. He did not know yet that he had just watched the beginning of the worst thing that would ever happen to Clan V. Harkle, but his skin knew. His skin had known from the moment the human's voice went flat. It stayed the color of ash for the rest of the shift, and no amount of pressing it to the cool console would bring the color back. The medical bay on the Sump was one room, and the thing that ran it was a vetch named Alo who had learned surgery in a war Kest had never asked about. Kest knew what happened there next only second-hand, from Alo later, in the low, careful voice the vetch used when he was telling the truth and wished he weren't. The human had carried the grower in and laid him on the slab and said, "His forelimb, and something in the second joint. He went quiet on the way, that's new, that's not good," reciting it clean, a field report, and then she had stood back against the wall and let Alo work, and she had not made a sound. Alo had glanced at her once, the blood on her jaw. The way she held the wall, both hands flat against it behind her, pressing, as if the wall were the only thing keeping her still. "You want me to look at that?" he'd said, meaning her face. "No," the human had said, "fix him." So Alo had fixed him, as much as a torn cella could be fixed in a one-room bay with frontier stock, and the whole time the human had stood against the wall with her hands pressed flat behind her and watched, and the only thing that moved on her was her eyes, which followed Alo's instruments, learning them, and her jaw, which set a little harder each time the grower stirred, and made its small hurt sound under the anesthetic. When it was done, when Seth was stable, splinted, breathing in the shallow, even rhythm of the sedated, Alo told her the truth, because she had asked for it, and because he thought she was owed it. The forelimb would heal crooked. Cella cartilage did not reset clean once it had been folded past a certain angle, and Daxus had taken it well past. Seth would keep the limb. He would never again use it for the fine work of grafting, and grafting was the only trade a cella had, the only thing that made a cella worth a berth, and a water ration on a station that did not otherwise want soft, translucent things underfoot. "So they've ended him," Alo said quietly. "Not his life, just everything that made the life worth the water. You understand, on the Sump, a cella who can't graft is cargo. He'll be off on the next hauler that'll take him, and the ones that'll take a cripple for free don't feed them the whole way." The human had looked at the sleeping grower for a while. "They did this for fun," she said. It was not a question, she was confirming a figure. "Yes," Alo said. "Not for the toll." "There is no toll," Alo said. "There's never been a toll, they make it up when they want a reason. Mostly they don't bother with a reason." He hesitated because he was a decent creature and he could see where the human was standing, right at the edge of something. "Ren, there are 40 of them. They came off a hauler that's killed its way across 3 sectors. The hyphus takes limbs at trophies, you understand, off things he's beaten, he wears the small bones. This is what they are, your pump crew, your contract. In 2 years your rotation ends and you go home, and none of this followed you. Don't," he stopped. "Don't what?" she said. "Don't make it follow you home." The human had crossed to the slab then, and put one hand very lightly on the grower's uninjured shoulder, the four-eyed face slack and small in the medical light, and she had stood like that a moment. Then she'd said the only thing she said in that room that Alo repeated to Kest word for word, because it did not sound to him like a threat, which was what made it one. "He's not cargo," she said. "He carried a warm root up 3 flights once to a clerk who looked tired for no reason. He's the only thing on this whole rotten rock that ever did anything for no reason." She adjusted the splint a hair so it would not pull. "You should all remember that about him, later, when they're asking what he was." And she'd wiped the blood off her jaw with the back of her wrist, smearing it into the grease, and gone to find her foreman. Ree ran the deep heat contract, and Ree had been on frontier stations for 30 years, and Ree took one look at Ren coming across the crew deck with a split jaw and that particular stillness on her, and put down the coupling he was rebuilding. "How bad's the cella?" he said. "Bad." She sat down across from him on an overturned crate. "Crippled. Dreeg did it for laughs, second fist, 3 others watching." Ree was quiet a moment. He was a big man gone lean with age, hands like tool steel, a foreman's flat, careful eyes. He had buried crew before. He had also, Kest would learn, been the one who taught this particular rigger her trade 4 years ago, when she'd come up green and small and angry off a colony world, and he'd warned the angry off her and left the small and the still. "You've got that look," Ree said. "What look?" "The one I spent 2 years getting rid of." Wren didn't answer that. She picked up a spare coupling off the bench and turned it in her hands, testing the seat of the threads with her thumb, an idle motion, a working motion. 40 of them, Rhys said. One hauler, heavy. They've got a fabricator running in the hold. I've heard it through the pad night cycle. They make their own rounds. And the hyphist's arm, you seen the hyphist? No. His left arm's a machine from the shoulder down. He lost the real one somewhere and had it done over in the fab, and it's not a repair, it's a weapon. He's proud of it. He's got the trophy bones hung off it, little ones, off everything he's put down. He walks the concourse once a shift so everyone can see it. That's the whole reason they're here, not the ore. There's no money in this rock worth 40 guns. They're here because the sump is soft and they got tired of places that shoot back. They're resting. We're the rest. I know, Wren said. Then you know one rigger doesn't touch that. I know, Wren said again, in exactly the flat, even voice she'd used on Daxus. And Rhys heard it, and something moved behind the foreman's careful eyes, not fear, Kes thought later, when he pieced it together, but recognition, the specific tired recognition of a man watching a thing he'd hoped was buried come back up out of the ground. Wren, he said. I'm not going to do anything stupid, she said, and set the coupling down, seated clean, threads true. I'm going to sit with Seth tonight. That's all. That's tonight. She stood. And after tonight, Rhys said. She looked at him. Small, grease-smeared, blood-dried brown along her jaw, 23 years old and utterly without heat. After tonight, she said, depends on them. Kes did what he did with everything that frightened him. He looked it up. Long after the shift bell, alone in the harbor office with the moonlight coming rust-colored through the long glass, he pulled the human crew's contract file. And then, because the contract told him nothing, he pulled the deeper thing, the assay. The great survey registry, the catalog every clerk had access to, and almost none ever opened past the freight tables. The ledger where the Concord's long, slow instruments had graded every world they'd ever measured for how hard it was to live there, and how hard the things that lived there had become. He found Earth under a designation he had never had reason to read. Hero 9. He did not at first understand the number, because the Hero scale on his display ran 1 through 9, and he assumed 9 was the middle of a longer ladder. It was not. He found the scale definition. Grade Hero was the top band of the survivability index, the world so hostile that the survey's models predicted no persistent tool-using life should arise there at all, and the numbers inside the band did not measure the world. They measured how far past the model's own limit the world's dominant life had gone anyway. Hero 1 was a world that had produced something that should not exist. Hero 9 was the far end of a scale the survey had stopped extending because nothing kept climbing past it. Earth was the only entry at Hero 9, the only one. In a catalog of 900,000 graded worlds, there was exactly one line at the top of the top band, and beside it, in the flat language of the survey, an advisory in a class Kest had also never seen. Do not contract for hazardous labor. Do not test. Do not provoke. Persistent life index anomalous. Threat behavior latent, not absent. Recorded incidents attached, 147. He opened the incidents. He read 4 of them. He closed the file and sat in the rust-colored dark with his skin gone the pale of bone, and he thought about the small human walking out of the market at the pace of someone who has decided something, and the arm the hyphist wore his trophies on, and the way Allo had said don't make it follow you home, as if home were a place you could keep it out of. The Dreeg had not read the assay. Kest was certain of that the way he was certain of few things. The Dreeg did not read. They measured a species the way they measured everything, by hitting it and listening to the sound it made, and the Sella had made a good sound and the small human had made none at all, and to a Dreeg no sound meant nothing there. Empty, soft, safe. Kest had spent 11 years keeping records precisely so that he would never have to be the one who acted. He was a clerk. He filed. He survived by seeing and not being seen to see. He sat in the dark a long time. Then he did the second thing he had never done in 11 years. He made a private copy of the assay entry, all 147 incidents, and he saved it where only he could find it, because some instinct older than his caution told him that before this was over, someone was going to demand to know what the human was, and he wanted to be able to answer. He was right about that too. Gall was young for the crew, young enough that the trophy cord on his own harness held nothing yet but a single vetch finger bone he was not sure he'd earned, and he was the one sent down to the market the next shift to remind the little growers' people that the toll was still owed. He did not want to go. He would not have said so. You did not say so in Clan v. Harkle, not if you wanted to keep your rations and your rank and your teeth. But he did not want to go, because the grower's stall had been dark since the day before, and something about the dark stall bothered him in a way he could not name. Dreeg did not do well with things they could not name. Their whole culture was built to keep such things from happening. You named a thing by hitting it, you learned its measure by the sound, and then it was known and could be filed under weak or strong and dealt with accordingly. The world was supposed to make sound when you struck it. That was the deal. The human had made no sound. Gall had been one of the 4 in the row. He had watched Daxus hit her, and he had watched her go down, and he had waited like everyone for the sound. And instead she had breathed once and smiled, and Gall's crest had done something he'd been ashamed of and had told no one about. It had flattened. Not flared. Flattened, tight to his skull, the old prayer-response his kind had bred out of themselves 100,000 years ago and never quite finished. He had stood there with his crest laid flat against his skull while the little human walked away, and he had not understood why, and he did not like not understanding why. So when Daxus said, "Go down and see if the bug learned its lesson, and if the pumprunts there tell her the tolls doubled for the trouble she gave," Gall went, and he took 2 others because he did not want to go alone, and he told himself it was not because of the flat crest, and he half believed it. The grower was not at the stall, the human was. She was sitting on the closed stall step with a mug of something and a hand torch and a spread of small tools, and she was fixing the grower's water pump. The little manual thing every cellar stall ran, a hand-cranked filter, turning a fitting with a driver, unhurried, in the exact posture of a creature that has decided to be somewhere for a while. She had a fresh seal strip along her jaw where the cut had been. She did not look up when the 3 Dreeg came into the row, and the market, which had begun tentatively to breathe again, stopped once more. "Stalls closed," Gall said, and hated that it came out as information instead of a threat. "Growers in the med bay," the human said, "on account of your second fist, so I'm minding his pump. Somebody's got to. Cartilage grafts don't wait, the seed stock in his tanks'll die if the water goes stale, and then he's got nothing to come back to. You follow." She seated the fitting and tested the crank. Water moved clean through the little clear line. "There, that'll hold him a week." Gall did not follow. He had not been sent to follow. "Tolls doubled," he said, "for yesterday." The human finally looked up at him. She had a plain flat face, small dark eyes, nothing in them, and the look she gave Gall was not the look Prey gave. It was the look the medvetch gave a wound. Assessing, sorting, deciding how much of a problem it was going to be and in what order. She looked at Gall and then at the 2 behind him, taking her time, and Gall felt his crest strain against the muscle he was using to hold it up. "You're the young one," she said. "You were there yesterday in the back, you didn't touch him." Gall said nothing. "The finger bone," she said, nodding at his trophy cord. "That's your only one, so either you're new or you're not good at this." She said it without cruelty, the way she'd say a coupling was cross-threaded. "Here's the thing about the toll. There isn't one. Allo told me." "You make it up. That's fine, I don't care about the toll. I want you to carry a message back to your second fist for me, and I want you to carry it exactly, because you seem like the one who might." "I don't carry your—" "Tell Daxus," the human said, gently seating the last screw, "that the pump's fixed and the grower's alive, and that as far as I'm concerned that closes it. Nobody has to do anything about anything. He got his fun, the cell is crippled, it's done. Tell him I'm not going to make trouble. She stood and gathered her tools into a roll, and the roll went into a thigh pocket with the ease of long habit, and Gaul noticed for the first time that the human's hands were scarred all over, small scars, work scars, and that she moved the way the crew's own veterans moved, economical, nothing wasted, always half a step from the wall. That's the whole message. 2 parts. Growers alive. I'm not going to make trouble. That's it, one of the Dreeg behind Gaul said and laughed, relieved, because it was the response the arrangement wanted, the soft thing offering its throat. That's it, the human agreed. And that should have been the end of it, and Gaul, who did not do well with things he could not name, felt a great uncomplicated relief and turned to go, and it was only 3 steps up the row that the second part of the message caught up with him and turned over in his gut like a swallowed stone. Because she had not said, I don't want trouble, which is what soft things said. She had said, I'm not going to make trouble, as if trouble were a thing she made. As if she were, in fact, the source of it, and was informing them, as a courtesy, that she had chosen not to open the tap. Gaul carried the message back. He carried it exactly, because she'd been right that he was the one who would. And Daxus laughed his fire laugh and flared his crest, and said the Pumfront was learning her place, and the crew laughed with him, and Gaul laughed too because you did. But Gaul had heard the second part, and that night when the fabricator ran in the hold and the crew slept the heavy sleep of things that had never in their lives had to sleep light, Gaul lay awake with his crest flat against his skull and thought. She said growers alive as if it were the important half, as if the 2 halves were connected, as if she'd told them, the reason there's no trouble is that he's alive. And he understood, lying there, though he could not have put it in words a Dreeg would respect, that a countdown had started, and that it was not counting down to anything the crew could hit. Kest learned the shape of the next 4 days the way he learned everything, from the manifest and the pad logs and the long glass of his office, and afterward he could lay them out like a fault building toward a slip. Day 1 the human worked her rotation. 12 hours on the deep heat lines, the hardest and hottest labor on the Sump, the job the Dreeg would not have touched if you'd paid them, and she came off it filthy and steady and went straight to the med bay and sat with the grower. Kest knew because he logged her badge through the pad seals. In and out. Pump job. Med bay, crew deck, nothing else. Day 2 the same, except that at the end of it she stopped by the harbor office. Kest nearly changed color through his whole hide when she came up the stairs. He had convinced himself, in the way of frightened creatures, that if he simply kept away from the human then whatever was coming would keep away from him. But she only wanted the docking schedule, which haulers were due, which were leaving, which would take a passenger and which would take a passenger who could not pay. She wanted, specifically, to know which departing ships would carry a crippled Sella somewhere with clean water and other Sella and a chance, and which would just carry him out to space and forget to feed him. That's not usually a thing riggers ask, Kest said, before he could stop himself. The human looked at him. His skin was doing its cowardly gray, and she saw it, and something in her plain face softened by a degree Kest would not have believed the face capable of the day before in the market. You're the clerk, she said. You were up here yesterday in the window. You saw the whole thing. I see everything, Kest said wretchedly. It's the job seeing and filing. And you didn't file it. Kest's modeling flared. He had not told anyone that. There was no way she could. How do you? There'd have been a follow-up, she said. Medbay draws a report pings the incident log pings a clerk. Nobody pinged Alo, so you buried it or you never opened it. She wasn't accusing him. She was reading a gauge again. That took something. On this station, that took something. Kest did not know what to do with that, so he pulled up the docking schedule and showed her the ships, and told her, honestly, which captains fed their passengers and which did not, because he did know, because he saw everything, and because it was the first time in 11 years that his seeing everything had been asked to be worth something to anyone. The Fen hauler in 9 days would take a cella. The captain was a hard old bird, but she watered and fed her cargo because a reputation was worth more to her than the ration. She ran a green water route to a cella cooperative 3 jumps out, a real place, tanks and sun panels and 100 growers, a place a crippled cella could learn a coarser trade and live. 9 days, the human said, looking at it. He'll be walking by then. Allah would know. Allah says 11. She was quiet a moment, doing some arithmetic that had nothing to do with days. Book it, the Fen ship. 1 cella, green water route, fed and watered the whole way. Whatever it costs. I'm pump crew. I've got 2 years hazard pay sitting in an account I was never going to spend. She put her badge to his reader and authorized it before he could tell her the fare, and the fare was brutal, and she did not blink. 9 days, okay, that's the frame. Thank you, clerk. Kest, he said, surprising himself. Kest, she agreed. At the top of the stairs she paused. You made a copy of something last night off the deep registry. His whole hide went white. The office had no witness he could imagine how. That access is logged, but it's not, you can't have. I didn't read your logs, the human said. You've got the look, a guy who found out what I am and can't decide what to do about it. The small, terrible knot smile touched her mouth and was gone. Keep the copy. Somebody's going to want it read out after. You'll do it better than anyone. And she went down the stairs, and Kest sat in the dark, understanding that the human had known, from the way his skin moved, that he had gone into the assay and read the number, and had decided that this was useful to her, and had folded him into whatever was coming as neatly and unhurriedly as she had seated the grower's pump fitting. He was not afraid of her, he realized. That was the strange part. He was afraid of what she was going to be aimed at. Day 3 was when the Dreeg decided the human's cold was an insult. It started, the way these things do, small. A Dreeg named Vok stood over the human's mess tray in the common galley, the one place on the Sump where crews of every kind ate the same reclaimed protein off the same steel benches, because even Clan V. Harkle had not bothered to build a second kitchen. And when Ren came in off her rotation and sat, Vok reached over and took her tray. Just took it, slid it down the bench in front of himself and looked at her, crest idling orange, waiting for the sound. The galley went quiet the way the market had gone quiet. Kest was there, he ate late, alone in the corner, because a clerk who saw everything did not eat with the crews he filed, and he watched over the rim of his cup with his hearts going hard. Ren looked at the empty place where her tray had been. Then she got up, without a word, and went back to the line and drew another tray and came back and sat down in the same place and began to eat. Vok had not expected that. He'd expected the sound or the retreat or the flare of temper he could answer with a fist. He got a small human methodically, eating reclaimed protein as though he did not exist, and the not existing was worse than any insult, because it invited the whole galley to notice that he had taken a tray and got nothing for it, and a Dreeg who got nothing looked, for one bad moment, like a Dreeg who could be got nothing from. So he took the second tray too. Ren set down her utensil. She looked at Vok for the first time, really looked, that sorting Medvech look, and Kest saw her weigh something and set it down again, unused, because it was not yet time whatever it was, and instead she said in the flat, quiet voice, "You keep taking food out of my hands. On this station that's a thing that gets remembered, not by me. By the record." Her eyes flicked once unmistakably to the corner where Kest sat frozen with his cup. The clerk sees everything. He's seeing this. It's going in. Someday somebody's going to read out everything that got done here in order, and this'll be in it. The day you were so hungry for a small human's dinner you took it twice. She picked up her utensil again. I'd give it back, not for me, for how it's going to sound, read out loud later. It was the strangest threat Vok had ever received, because it was not a threat at all, it was a prediction, delivered flat, and it named a future in which the Dreeg's certainty had already ended and only the accounting remained. And Vok, who could not hit a prediction, and could not hit the clerk without a reason, and could not sit there holding 2 trays while 40 crewmates and 100 others watched him fail to get a sound out of a runt. Shoved the trays back down the bench so hard one of them went off the end and clattered to the deck, and got up and left, his crest flaring a furious orange that fooled no one, least of all Gaul, who was watching from the far bench with his own crest held carefully, deliberately flat. Because Gaul had understood something in the galley that the others had not. He'd understood that the human was not defending her dinner. She was building a record. She kept pointing at the clerk, at the seeing, at the later, and a creature only built a record it intended to close. You did not catalog a debt you meant to forgive. That night Daxus convened the crew in the hold, under the running fabricator, and Gaul stood at the back and listened to the second fist explain that the Pumprun had gotten above herself, and that the soft things on the Sump were watching to see whether Clan V. Harkle still held the station, or whether a human half their size could take food off a dreeg and walk, and that this could not stand, and that tomorrow they would remind the whole depot, in front of everyone, exactly what the arrangement was. And Gaul, who did not do well with things he could not name, opened his mouth to say a thing he could not have named. She wants you too. She's been laying it out like bait. The record, the later, she's building towards something and you're walking into the frame she drew, and then he closed it, because you did not say so in Clan V. Harkle, and because he did not have the words a dreeg would respect, and because he was afraid, for the first time in his young life, of being right. He said nothing. He would carry that too. The High-Fist walked the concourse at midday, and that was how Kest knew the crew meant to make it public. Ormego V. Harkle did not usually rouse himself for market discipline. He was old for a dreeg and vast with it, a slab of ash-gray muscle gone heavy at the shoulders, his crest a deep permanent scarlet from the countless small ruptures of a long violent life, and he walked with the unhurried certainty of a thing that has never once in its existence been made to hurry. And on his left side, from the shoulder down, he wore the arm. Kest had seen it before at a distance and had made himself not look. Now, with the human's cold spreading through the station like a slow change in the pressure, he made himself look, because he understood the arm was going to matter. It was fabricated, a dreeg-built prosthetic, which meant it was not built to pass for the limit replaced, but to be better than it. A thing of black articulated plate and exposed actuators, and a great blunt 3-fingered hand that could close on a support strut and dent it. It was strong enough to lift the High-Fist's own weight one-handed off the deck. Kest had seen it do that, once in the early days as a demonstration, Ormego hanging from a gantry by the fabricated hand while the crew roared. And along the forearm plating, threaded on a black cord run through drilled holes in the metal, hung the trophies, small bones, dozens of them, the finger bones and crest spurs and jaw hooks of everything the High-Fist had beaten and dismantled across 3 sectors, a rattling black rosary of other people's bodies. When he walked, the trophies clicked. You heard the High-Fist coming by the sound of the dead. He walked the concourse at midday with Daxus at his shoulder and 8 of the crew behind, and he came to the med bay, and he had them bring out the grower. That was the escalation Kest had not predicted, and it was the one that ended the crew. They carried Seth out onto the concourse still half sedated, the 4-eyed face slack, the splinted forelimb held awkward against the small translucent body, and they set him on the deck in the wide public space under the dome where every crew on the Sump would pass, and Daxus put one boot lightly on the grower's uninjured forelimb, not crushing, just holding, just owning. And the High-Fist stood over the little creature and waited, because the High-Fist did not need to send for the human. He knew she would come. That was the whole design of it. You did not chase the soft thing. You took what it loved out into the open and let it come to you, into the frame in front of everyone, so that, when you broke it, the breaking would be seen, and the arrangement would be renewed for another year. Word went through the Sump, the way water finds a crack. Kest was already moving, down from the office, which he had not done in 11 years for anything, out onto the gallery above the concourse where he could see. And by the time he reached the rail, the wide floor under the dome had filled with the silent watching crews, Amat and Vetch and Sella and the rest, ringing the open space at a safe distance, and in the center of it the hyphist and his 8, and the grower on the deck, and Daxus's boot resting on the small forelimb like a man resting his foot on a rail. And down the pump side corridor, unhurried, still in her grease-stained coverall because she had come straight off the line again, came the human. She stopped at the edge of the ring. She took in the whole of it in one slow pass, the hyphist, the arm, the trophies, the 8, the boot on her friend's limb, the way she'd taken in the market, the way she read a coupling before she touched it. Kest, gripping the rail above with his hide gone bone-white, saw her do the thing he had seen her do in the market. Breathe once, all the way in and all the way out like a diver going down. Pumprunt, the hyphist said. His voice was a low grind, amused, enormous. You took a tray off one of mine. You gave my second fist a message like you were a captain with a ship. The whole rock's been watching you be brave. The trophies clicked as he shifted the great fabricated arm. So here's the account. I put my hand on your bug here in the open and you watch, and everyone watches you watch, and then you go back to your pumps and we don't hear another flat word out of you for the rest of your rotation. That's the toll. Not ore, not pay. Just you learning the shape of the thing. He smiled, a dreeg smile, all the back teeth. Come stand where you can see. The human did not move for a moment. Then she walked out into the ring, into the frame, exactly as designed, and she came to a stop an easy arm's length from the hyphist, small under the vast scarlet-crested bulk of him, and she looked up at the fabricated arm and its cord of little bones, and she said, in the flat, quiet voice that carried in the silence all the way up to Kest at the rail, "That's a lot of bones." 3 sectors of them, the hyphist said, pleased to be asked. You take them off things you beat. I take them off things I end, the hyphist corrected. Beaten things heal, ended things I keep. He turned the arm so the trophies caught the light. There's a place on the cord for a piece of your bug, small. He'd hardly be worth a knuckle, but I'll add him after so you remember. Every time you see the arm. And the human looked at the arm a while longer, with an expression Kest had no word for, an expression that was almost courteous, the way you might study a machine you were about to have to repair and did not relish repairing. And then she nodded slowly, as if the hyphist had finally, helpfully, told her the one thing she had come out into the ring to learn. Okay, she said, for the 3rd time that week, and Kest's heart went cold in his chest, because he had learned by now what the human's okay meant. It did not mean agreement. It meant a figure had been confirmed, and the tap had been opened, and the thing that came out of it now was not going to close until the account was empty. What happened next took less time than it takes to describe, and Kest, who saw everything, spent the following days assembling it from the fragments his eyes had actually caught, because in the moment his mind simply refused the speed of it. The human's hands were empty. That was the thing every witness agreed on afterward, and the thing that mattered. She had no weapon. She was a rigger in a coverall with a tool roll in her thigh pocket, standing in front of the deadliest crew in the sector, and her hands were empty. She took one step, not toward the hyphist, which is where every dreeg eye was fixed, but sideways and down, toward Daxus, toward the boot resting on Seth's forelimb. And she did 3 things so close together that they were, for practical purposes, one thing. She dropped, all the way down, fast, folding to the deck, and the drop took her under the sweep of Daxus's hand as it came around, too slow, aimed at where her head had just been. She got a grip on the ankle above the boot on Seth's limb, both her scarred hands, one high, one low, the way she'd grip a seized coupling that had to come free now, and she turned it. Not a wrench. A turn, a full committed rotation driven from her legs and her back and the whole small weight of her. The way you break a fitting that has been torqued down by something stronger than you and left to seize. The way the deep heat crews broke things all day every day with leverage instead of size. And the ankle of a dreeg, for all its ash-gray bulk, was still an ankle, still a joint, still a place where the design admitted a limit. And it went past the limit, with a sound Kest felt in his own limbs from 30 feet up. Daxa screamed. It was a Dreeg scream, and Kest had never heard one in 6 months, and neither had most of the crews on the Sump. And the sound of it going up under the dome did more to end the arrangement than anything the human had said all week, because the arrangement was built on the certainty that only the soft things screamed. And the third thing she did in the same motion, coming up out of the crouch as Daxus folded toward his ruined ankle, was gather Seth off the deck one arm, that same impossible gentleness, and step back out of Daxus's collapse, out of the reach of the 8, into the open space of the ring, holding her friend against her chest, her hands empty again, her breathing even. The whole of it, from her first step to her stillness with Seth in her arms, and Daxus down and howling on the deck, clutching a foot that now pointed away. Feet do not point. Nobody moved. The 8 had their hands on their weapons and had not drawn them, because the thing that had just happened did not fit the shape of a fight they knew how to have. There was no enemy to charge. There was a small human standing quietly in the middle of the ring holding a farmer, and one of their own on the ground, and a silence, and the silence was the worst part, because the silence belonged to her now. The high fist looked at his second fist on the deck. He looked at the human. His scarlet crest, which had been idling in lazy amusement, had gone very still, not flared, not flat, still, the stillness of a thing recalculating. And Kest understood that the high fist was, for the first time, actually looking at the human, seeing her, the way Kest had seen her when her voice went flat in the market. Too late, but seeing. "You broke my second fist's foot," the high fist said slowly, "to pick up a bug." "You had your boot on him," the human said. She was already turning Seth in her arms, checking the splint, reading the small body for new damage, her attention more than half on her friend, and only the necessary fraction spared for the vast armed thing in front of her, and the insult of that division of attention was total. "I asked you to take it off." "Nobody took it off, so I took the foot off it." She got the splint settled. Seth stirred, one small hand closing weakly in the fabric of her coverall. "That closes the part where he was on the ground. The rest of it, the arm, the bones, the piece of him you were going to keep." She looked up at the high fist, and the not smile was gone now. There was nothing on her face at all, and that nothing was the most frightening thing Kest had ever seen. "That part's still open. I'm going to close that too. Not here. You've got a lot of people watching, and I don't do the rest of it in front of people." The high fist should have killed her then. Every witness understood that afterward, and so, Kest thought, did the high fist later at the end, when there was time to understand things. 9 armed Dreeg against 1 unarmed human holding a cripple. It would have cost them 2, maybe 3, and it would have ended it, and Clan v. Harkle would have birthed on the Sump another year. But the high fist did not kill her, and the reason he did not was the reason the crew was doomed, and it was written into what a Dreeg was. He did not kill her because he was insulted, and a Dreeg answered an insult not with efficiency but with a lesson, and a lesson had to have an audience and a shape and a slow, satisfying arc, and you did not get the arc by cutting a runt down in the open in 10 seconds like putting out a small fire. You got the arc by taking your time, by making her wait, by choosing the ground and the hour, so that when you ended her it meant something, so that the whole rock learned the shape of the thing all over again, deeper this time. "You've got spirit, Pumprunt," the high fist said, and made himself smile, and the smile was a beat too late and everyone saw it. "I'll give you your friend, keep him, nurse him." He turned the great fabricated arm and the trophies clicked, and he made his voice large again for the audience, reclaiming the ring. "The Fen hauler comes in 8 days. I've heard you bought the bug a berth on it, sweet. So here's how it closes. The bug leaves on the Fen ship, or he doesn't leave at all, and neither do you, and I take the pieces I said I'd take off both of you in front of this whole rock, the night before she sails. 8 days, you spend them thinking about it, that's the toll now, that's the shape of it." He looked down at Daxus, who was being hauled up by 2 of the crew, the ruined foot dangling, "and you spend them knowing what it cost you to buy them." He turned and walked back up the concourse, the 8 closing around the limping second fist, the trophies clicking, the crest scarlet and held high by main force, and the crews of the Sump parted to let Clan V Harkle pass the way they always had, except that this time, Kest saw, a few of them did not lower their eyes. The human stood in the emptying ring with her friend in her arms, until the Dreeg were gone. Then she carried Seth back into the med bay, unhurried at the pace of someone who has decided something, and the concourse behind her filled with a low sound Kest had never heard on the Sump in 11 years. The sound of 100 cowed creatures beginning, very quietly, to talk. 8 days. Kest went back up to his office and pulled the private copy of the assay entry out of its hiding place and read all 147 incidents, this time, start to finish, through the rust-colored night. And near the end, he found the line that the survey had appended to the whole file, the summary judgment, the thing the conquered slow instruments had concluded about the world at the top of the top band after measuring it for 400 years. And he read it 3 times, and then he understood exactly how the next 8 days were going to go. Threat behavior in the dominant persistent life form is not reactive but deferred, the survey had written. The organism does not answer a provocation. It absorbs it, indexes it, and settles it at a time, and in a manner of its own choosing, typically after the provoking party has concluded the matter closed. Field observers are cautioned that apparent de-escalation by this organism should be read as scheduling. Apparent de-escalation should be read as scheduling. Kest set down the reader. Below him, through the long glass, the Sump turned under its scarred dome, and on the pad the Dreeg hauler sat dark and enormous with its fabricator glowing in the hold, 40 guns resting easy inside it, certain they had 8 days, certain they had set the shape of the thing, certain the arrangement held. They had not read the assay. The human had not needed to. She had come preloaded with the whole of it, 400 years of survey data written into her flat, quiet voice and her empty, scarred hands, and she had just been told, out loud in front of the whole rock, exactly where the crew would be and how many and how sure of themselves, on a night 8 days out. She would not wait 8 days. Kest knew that now. Apparent de-escalation should be read as scheduling, and she had just been handed a schedule, and she was not the kind of thing that kept another creature's appointment. She was the kind of thing that arrived early. Inside the hauler, the 8 days did not go the way the Hyphist had promised the rock they would. Gaul felt it first in the mess. Dreeg ate loud, it was a communal thing. The crew jammed shoulder to shoulder at the long trough tables, crests flaring and folding in the constant status talk of a warrior clan who ranked above whom, who had done what? The endless bright arithmetic of dominance conducted in flushed color and bared teeth. It was the sound of a crew that was sure of itself. And in the days after the concourse, that sound got quieter. Nobody would have admitted why. You did not admit why in Clan V Harkle. But Daxus sat at the high table with his foot in a fabricated brace, and the foot would knit wrong the way the grower's limb would knit wrong. Allo the Vetch was the only surgeon on the rock, and Allo had, with great professional courtesy, set the ankle in a way that would technically heal and never again bear the second fist's full weight in a turn. And every Dreeg in the mess looked at that brace and thought the thing none of them said. A runt did that, with her hands, in the time it takes to spit. And the trophies. The Hyphist wore the arm to mess, as he always did, and the little bones clicked when he reached for the trough. And in the old days that sound had been the sound of the clan's whole history. Every enemy ended, hung where all could see. Now Gaul caught the younger crew glancing at the cord of bones and then, quickly, away, and he knew they were all thinking the same forbidden thought because he was thinking it too. The human had looked at that cord and said that's a lot of bones, not with fear, the way a beaten thing looked at a trophy, but the way a creditor looks at a ledger. Counting. Adding a line. On the 3rd day, the fabricator changed its note. Gaul knew the fabricator's sound the way he knew his own breathing. It had run every night since they birthed, turning out rounds and blades and replacement plate, the steady industrial hum of a crew that made its own war. On the 3rd night after the concourse, the hum climbed and thickened, and Gaul went down to the hold to see, and found the Hyphist himself standing over the machine with the master runners while it built something long and heavy in the cradle. A breaching frame and cutting charges, and a rack of the short, brutal boarding guns the clan used when it meant to take a ship or clear a hold at close range in the dark. "We hold the rock," Gaul said before he could stop himself. "Why are we building to board?" The Hyphist looked at him. The old scarlet crest, the vast patient bulk. "We're not building to board," he said. "We're building so that when the runt does whatever she thinks she's going to do, we answer it once hard and the whole rock watches us answer and it's finished. She wants the night before the hauler. Fine. We'll be ready 3 nights early and every night after, and when she comes we take her apart in front of everyone and we do not stop at the pieces I promised. You understand?" The mistake on the concourse was letting her set the pace. We don't let her set the pace again. It was a good speech. It was the speech of a commander who had run 3 sectors of successful violence and knew exactly how these things went. And Gaul, standing in the hold with the breaching frame taking shape in the cradle, understood with a cold, falling certainty that the Hyphist had heard the human say, "I don't do the rest of it in front of people," and had learned nothing from it, because the Hyphist could not imagine a fight that was not meant to be seen. His whole life was a lesson delivered to an audience. He was building a defense against a thing that would come with an audience. And the human had told him, flatly, in front of the whole rock, that she did not do it in front of people. She was not going to come at them in the open on their chosen night, into the frame they were building. Gaul saw it the way you see a rockfall start, the first small stones before the slope goes. She was going to come at them in the dark on a night of her own, into the one place a dreeg felt safe enough to sleep light-crested and slow, the hull, the berth, the hold, home, and there would be no audience at all, and the breaching frame in the cradle would be pointed at the wrong door. He almost said it. He stood in the hold with his young crest flat against his skull, and the words rose in him. "She's not coming from outside. She's not going to give you the fight you're building. You've read her backward." And then the Hyphist's eye was on him, heavy and certain and old. And Gaul was 19 years alive with 1 vetch finger bone on his cord, and no standing at all to tell the Hyphist of Clan V. Harkle that he'd read a runt backward. And the words died in Gaul's throat the way they had died in the galley and the way they had died in the first hold meeting, and he said instead, "Yes, Hyphist," and helped carry the cutting charges to the rack. He would carry that longest of all, not the fear. The knowing and the silence over the knowing, again and again, until it was too late to be anything but a witness. The rock felt it before the crew did, and that was the thing Kest watched build through the long glass, while the dreeg stood at their wall each night waiting for a fight that did not come. It started small, the way the human's whole week had started small. A vetch trader in the market, the same one who'd gone very still behind his crates on the first day, set his stall back up in the produce row in the spot the dreeg had cleared, and did not move it when a pair of the crew came through on their rounds, and the pair, keyed to the front hatch and the runt who kept not coming, did not have the spare attention to make him move, and so the stall stayed, and the whole row saw that the stall stayed. It was nothing. It was a fruit stall in a spot. It was the first thing on the Sump in 6 months that had not gotten out of the dreeg's way, and by the next shift there were 3 stalls in the row that would not move, and the crew, watching the wrong door, did not notice the arrangement fraying behind them 1 fruit stall at a time. Kest logged it all, because he logged everything, and for the first time in 11 years the logging felt like keeping a fuse count instead of burying a body. He watched an Ahmet dockhand, one of his own, one of the 2 who'd found urgent reasons to face the wall on the first day, refuse to unload a dreeg-marked crate ahead of the freight queue, just refuse quietly, citing the manifest, the same manifest Kest kept, and watched the dreeg loader flare his crest and get no sound out of the dockhand, and having no idea what to do with a soft thing that simply cited the rules. Stalk off to complain to a second fist who was in a fabricated brace and had bigger problems. He watched a Sella waterhouse keeper leave the water on past curfew so the growers could tend their tanks, curfew being a thing the Dreeg had imposed and were suddenly too distracted to enforce. None of it was the human. That was what Kest understood watching it. She was in the med bay with her friend, or down on the deep heat lines running her rotation, or asleep in a chair, and she had not organized a thing, had not spoken to the vetch or the dock hand or the water keeper, had not raised a finger or a voice. She had simply, in the market and on the concourse in front of the whole rock, refused to make the sound, and the refusal had gotten into the water, and the rock was drinking it, one small act at a time, each creature discovering that the arrangement had only ever been held together by everyone agreeing to practice not seeing it, and that the agreement could be broken by any one of them, quietly, at the cost of a little courage, the way she had broken it at the cost of a great deal. The Dreeg felt the fraying without being able to name it, and it made them worse. Kest watched two of the crew corner the vetch trader over the immovable stall and take it apart, board by board in front of the row, trying to put the sound back in the market, and the row watched them do it, and did not scatter the way it once had, and the vetch did not make the pitch-climbing sound. He stood and watched his stall come apart with his crates held still against his body, and when the Dreeg were done there was no satisfaction in it, because you cannot restore an arrangement by wrecking a stall. You can only prove that a stall is all you have left to wreck. The crew went back to the wall angrier and less certain, and the rock quietly built the stall again the next shift, and Kest logged that too. He nearly went down to warn the vetch, the old cowardly reflex, the file it clean reflex, the get them to stop before it brings worse reflex. He didn't. He'd learned something, watching the human, that 11 years of keeping records had never taught him. That there was a difference between the peace of a thing that had stopped fighting and the quiet of a thing that had decided to fight and simply hadn't started yet, and that the Sump had spent 6 months in the first kind and had, this week, without any one creature deciding it, slid into the second. He did not warn the vetch. He logged the stall and the second stall and the third, and he understood he was keeping the record of a rock learning, in real time, from one small hurt human, that the sound was optional. Kest did not sleep either those days, and on the 4th night the human came up to the harbor office and asked him for the one thing he had that no one else on the Sump could give her. The hauler's berth file, she said. Docking clamps, umbilical map, the emergency schematic the pad keeps on every ship that lands, life support tie-ins, where the fab's fed from, where the crew bunks. She said it the way she'd asked for the docking schedule, flat, itemized, a rigger drawing up a job. You've got it. Every ship that clamps to this station files it. It's the law even out here, especially out here. Kest's hide went pale and stayed pale, and he did not reach for the file. You're going to their ship, he said. Yes. Alone. Yes. She looked at him with the plain, flat patience she'd shown Gaul in the market. Kest, there are 40 of them building a wall to catch me coming through the front, on a night they picked in front of a crowd, because that's the only kind of fight they know how to imagine. So I'm not going to have that fight. I'm going to have a different one in the dark in their berth, where they sleep. And I need to know the berth better than they do, because that's the only edge that matters when it's 1 against 40, not being stronger, being somewhere they don't expect and knowing where the doors are. She paused. You've got the doors. They'll kill you, Cass said wretchedly. The file won't one rigger, a hull full of the file won't save you. The file's not to save me, she said it simply. The file's so I know where they are and they don't know where I am, and so when it's done I can walk out the way I came in. That's all a plan is, this kind of plan, knowing the room. She was quiet a moment, and then she said the only thing she said in that office that sounded like anything but a job. I'm not doing this to win, clerk. I already know how it comes out. I read the same thing you read, not off your screen. I mean, I know what we are. I grew up knowing. It's not a secret to us the way it's a secret to you. I'm doing it because they took the grafting out of Seth's hands for a laugh, and then they put a boot on him in front of the whole rock to make me watch. And there's a version of the next 8 days where I do nothing and he sails away crippled and they stay and do it to the next soft thing that comes through. And the next forever, because nobody here can afford to be the one who moves. She looked out through the long glass at the dark hauler on the pad. I can afford it. I'm the one thing on this rock that can afford it. So it's mine to do. Kest sat in the rust-colored dark and looked at the small human and thought about 11 years of filing small cruelties clean, so the record would swallow them, of seeing everything and being seen to see nothing. Of the coward gray his skin went the instant a dreeg raised its crest. He thought about the warm root in his drawer, dried to a husk, brought up 3 flights by a grower who would never graft again. He pulled the birth file. He gave her all of it, the clamps, the umbilical map, the life support tie-ins, the fab feed, the bunk plan. The maintenance crawlways the dreeg would never think to watch because dreeg did not crawl. They walked in the front like they owned it. He watched her read it once, the way she read a coupling, the whole thing going into her in a single unhurried pass, and he saw her find the 2 or 3 things on it that mattered and set the rest aside. And he understood he was watching something the survey had spent 400 years trying to describe, and had only managed to file a warning about. There's a maintenance gallery runs the spine of her, he heard himself say, pointing, his own limb steadier than it had been in days. Above the bunk deck, the pad techs use it. It's not on the cruise map because it's the stations, not the ships. You can move the whole length of the hull up there and come down anywhere. And the fab here, it's fed off the station's main bus through this junction, on our side of the clamp. If that feed cut, their whole hold goes dark and their fabricated things stop, including, he stopped. Including the arm, the human said. Including the arm, it's fabricated. It runs off a cell, but the cell trickle charges off the whole bus when he's aboard. If the bus cuts and he's been aboard, the arm's on reserve. Reserve's not much. It'll go slow. Kest's hide, he noticed distantly, had begun very faintly to bloom a color that was not gray. I can cut the bus. From here, on a word, it's a station function. It's the one thing on this whole rock that's mine and not theirs. They clamp to my station. The feed is mine. The human looked at him for a long moment, and then she did a thing she had not done once all week. She smiled, not the terrible small knot smile she gave the dreeg, but something smaller and realer and briefly, painfully human, the smile of a tired young creature who has just found out she is not, after all, entirely alone. Okay, she said, and this time the word meant what it was supposed to mean. Cut the bus when I tell you. Not before. I need them warm and slow, not dead in their bunks. That's not. She paused, and something crossed her face, some line she'd drawn for herself that Kest did not fully understand and would think about for years. I'm not going to kill 40 sleeping people, Kest. That's not what this is. I want them awake. I want them up and armed and sure of themselves and coming, all of them, into the dark at me. And then I want the lights and the fab and the arm to go slow, and I want to be the only thing in that hull that came ready for it. That's the plan. That's the whole plan. Give them the fight they wanted, just not the room. She rolled the birth file into her memory and stood. When do you go? Kest asked. Tomorrow's their 3rd night early. They'll be keyed up, watching the front, watching the concourse, waiting for me to come with a crowd. She was already at the stairs. So I'll go the night after, when they've stood at the wall 2 nights running and nothing came, and they've started just a little to believe they read me right. The knot smile came back just at the edge. Apparent de-escalation. Let them get comfortable, then keep the appointment early. She went down the stairs, and Kest sat with his hand over the station bus control that had been his for 11 quiet years and had never once mattered. And for the first time in his life, the seeing everything did not feel like a curse. It felt like a loaded thing. It felt like a door he alone could open. Seth woke enough to talk on the 5th day, and Ren was there when he did, because she was always there. She had worked her rotations and slept in a chair in the med bay and worked her rotations again. And Alo had stopped telling her to go rest because he'd seen the same look on soldiers once and knew There was no rest in her to find until the thing was done. The grower's 4 small eyes came open by degrees and found her, and the translucent skin along his throat pulsed a soft blue that Alo said was the Sela color for safe. "You're awake," Ren said. She'd pulled the chair close. "Don't move the forelimb, it's splinted, you're going to keep it." "The grafting," Seth said. His voice was a reed, thin, careful. Acela's whole face was expression. The 4 eyes and the throat light did what a human face did with muscle. Right now they did grief quietly without drama, the grief of a creature taking the measure of what it had lost. "I felt it fold. I know that fold. I've grafted 40 years, I know what that fold means for the hands. I won't graft again." "No," Ren said. She didn't soften it. He'd have known if she softened it. "Not the fine work, not the way you did." Seth was quiet, the throat light dimming toward a color Alo didn't have a word for. "There's a place," Ren said. 3 jumps out, green water. 100 growers, real tanks, real sun panels, coursework, bulk seed stock, the rough grafts, the kind you can do one-handed with a jig. It's not the fine work, it's a life. Water, son, your own kind, nobody putting a boot on you to hear the sound. The Fen hauler takes you there in 3 days. It's paid. It's done. You're going. You paid it, not a question. Seth knew what a berth on a fed route cost. I had it sitting there. I was never going to spend it on anything. Now I've spent it on something. She adjusted the splint a hair so it wouldn't pull, the same small motion she'd made in the first hour. Best money I ever didn't know what to do with. The throat light came back up blue, and one of the small eyes leaked the clear Sela tears that weren't sadness exactly, Alo said, but overflow, a body too full of a feeling to hold it all inside the skin. "They'll hurt you," Seth said. "For me. I've watched this station a long time, Ren. I know how it goes when someone doesn't lower their eyes. The hyphist said the night before the hauler. He said pieces. I heard it come down the row." The reed voice found an edge Ren had never heard in it. "Get on the hauler with me. There's room." "The captain owes no one here anything. She'd take a rigger. Riggers are worth their berth anywhere. Come with me. Let the rock have its arrangement. Let them win the ugly little thing they want to win. I'd rather have you crooked and alive on a green water world than whatever you're planning with that face." Ren looked at her friend a long moment. Outside, faintly, through the deck plate, the fabricator ran its thickened note in the dark hauler on the pad. "You brought a warm route up 3 flights to a clerk who looked tired," she said, "for no reason." "Nobody on this rock does anything for no reason, Seth. They can't afford to, and you did it anyway. And it's the only clean thing I've seen the whole 2 years I've been out here." She stood and pulled the thin med blanket up over the splinted limb. "I can't get on the hauler. Not because I'm brave. Because if I get on the hauler, they learned that it works, the boot, the toll, the pieces. They learned that if they put a boot on the right soft thing, the dangerous thing gets on a ship and leaves. And then they do it forever to everybody, and they're right to, because it worked once on me." She was at the door. "It's not going to have worked. That's the whole of it. When your hauler sails, it's going to sail into a galaxy where it didn't work. That's the thing I'm buying. Sleep. I'll be here in the morning." She was too, but the morning she meant was not the next one. Ree found her at the pump side lock that night, checking a tool roll she'd packed with things that were not for pumps. He didn't ask what she was doing. He'd been 30 years on Frontier Rock, and he knew a person kidding up when he saw one. He watched her seat a pry bar and a cutting driver and a coil of the thin high-tension line the deep heat crews used to sling loads, and a few other things, small, chosen, and roll it and strap it to her thigh. "You're going tonight," he said. "Not their night tonight." "Their night's a trap with a crowd in it," Ren said. "I'm not walking into a lesson. I'm going while they're still standing at the wrong wall." Ree was quiet. "Then take Baz and Tomas and me. 3 guns off the pump crew. We're not much, but we're not nothing, and 1 against 40 isn't a plan, it's not 1 against 40, Ren said. It's 1 against 40 in a hull where 40 is too many. 40 only helps them in the open, Ree, you know that, you taught me that. In a corridor in the dark, 40 is a crowd that can't shoot for fear of hitting each other. 40 is a traffic jam. 40 is noise I can hear coming and they can't hear me through. The number's theirs on the concourse. In the spine of that ship, the number's mine. She cinched the strap. If you three come, you die. You're not built for it, no offense, you're good men. You're just soft, all three of you, your pump crew, you go home in 2 years. I don't need backup. I need the one thing you can actually do. Name it, Ree said. When Seth's stable enough to move tomorrow, Alo says, you get him to the fin berth and you don't let him out of your sight until that hatch closes and the ship's away. Whatever else happens on this rock tomorrow, whatever you hear, you put my friend on that ship. That's the job. That's the only job I'm giving anybody but me. Ree looked at her for a long moment. This small, hard young woman he'd found green and angry 4 years ago and worn down to something quiet and terrible. And Kest, who had it later from Ree himself, said the old foreman's voice went rough. I spent 2 years trying to take this out of you, Ree said. I know. I was wrong. It wasn't a thing to take out. It was just early. He put a hand on her shoulder, the tool-steel hand of a man who'd buried crew. Go on then, keep the room, come back. That's the plan, Wren said. She was 10 steps toward the spine gallery access when the med bay alarm went, high and stuttering, down the length of the concourse. Because Daxus had not been able to wait either. Gaul had watched the second fist slip the hull at the turn of the night watch, and had known, the way he now knew everything a beat before it happened and said nothing, exactly where Daxus was going. The Highfist had them at the wall, a heavy skirmish line inside the main lock, the breaching frame ready, the boarding guns racked, the whole crew keyed up 2 nights running for a human who kept not coming through the front. And Daxus, whose ankle would never again bear his weight in a turn, whose shame sat on the whole clan like a smell, could not stand another night at that wall waiting for the runt to walk into the Highfist's lesson. He wanted his own. He wanted it in the dark and private and off the ledger, the bug that had cost him his foot, before the Highfist's public night took the satisfaction away and made it clan business instead of his. He took Vok and one other and went down the concourse to the med bay on a ruined ankle to kill a crippled grower in his sleep, because he could not reach the human and the grower was what she loved, and it was as close to her as his shame could get. He got through the med bay door. Alo the vetch was there. Alo slept by his patients, and Alo, who had learned surgery in a war, put himself between the Dreeg and the slab, and Daxus broke him aside almost gently, a swipe, and the old vetch went down against the instrument cart and did not get up quickly. And Baz was there. Young Baz, 20, one of Ree's pump crew, who had heard the whole rock talking about the small rigger and her crippled friend, and had decided, with the uncomplicated courage of the young, that somebody ought to sit outside the med bay at night just in case, and had told no one, and had been sitting there in the dark with a cutting driver in his fist and no idea at all what he'd volunteered for. Baz got up when the Dreeg came through the door. He was pump crew. He was soft, in the way Wren had meant it, built for 2 years and a trip home. But he got up, and he put himself in the door of the room where the sleeping grower lay, and he raised the cutting driver, and he said something. Vok, who lived, said afterward it was get away from him, just that. The boy's voice climbing the way soft voices climbed, and Daxus, almost bored, almost grateful for something to hit him. Once, the fabricated brace on the ruined foot did nothing to slow the second fist's arms, and the second fist's arms were still a Dreeg's. Baz went into the door frame and down, and the cutting driver skittered away across the deck, and the boy did not get up, and the sound the med bay made then was the flat, urgent stutter of the alarm Alo had triggered on his way down. That was the sound that reached Wren at the spine access, 10 steps into the dark. She did not run to it even then. Kest, who had the concourse cameras, watched her turn and cross the whole length of the arcade at that same unhurried, decided pace, faster than a walk and slower than a run. the pace of a thing that has heard exactly what a sound means and has already stopped hoping and started working. And by the time she reached the med bay, Daxus was coming out of it with Vok and the other. His business half done. The grower not yet dead because the alarm had rushed him. And he looked up and saw the small human standing in the concourse between him and his ship, empty hands, flat face, and behind her, through the medbay door, the boy crumpled in the frame and the old vetch dragging himself up and the grower alive and shrilling on the slab. "There you are," Daxus said, and smiled his back-teeth smile because this was better, this was private. This was the runt come to him in the open dark with no crowd and no hyphist, and he had 3 and she had nothing. The runt, "Come to watch me finish your—" "Is the boy alive?" Ren said, not to Daxus, to Allo past him into the room. Allo, on his knees by Baz, his own head bleeding, got 2 fingers to the boy's throat. "No," Allo said. And the human's face, which had held some line all week, some careful drawn line Kest had seen and not understood, let it go. Not into rage, that was the thing. That was the thing Kest would spend the rest of his life failing to make people understand. Not rage. Something further down and colder than rage. Something with no heat in it at all. Something the survey had spent 400 years measuring, and had only managed to file a warning about. "Okay," Ren said for the last time. And then she stopped being careful. Vok lived, and because Vok lived there was a witness to the concourse who was not Kest and not a camera, and the 2 accounts, the clerks, from the gallery cameras above, and Vok's from 6 feet away, agreed on everything except the speed, which the camera clocked and Vok's memory refused. There were 3 of them and they were armed and she was not, and Kest had braced himself, gripping the rail, to watch the human die in the open dark of the concourse, and instead he watched the 3 against 1 dissolve into something that was not a fight because a fight has 2 sides. She went at Daxus first, because Daxus was the biggest and the surest and the one who'd killed the boy, and because Daxus, on a ruined ankle, could not do the one thing a Dreeg's whole style depended on, which was turn. She came in low and fast off her back foot, and she did not try to strike the great ash-gray bulk of him, which would have been like striking the hull. She took the brace. She got both scarred hands on the fabricated ankle brace, and drove it the way it did not want to go, the way she'd driven the coupling, the way she'd driven the ankle the first time, and the joint that had never healed clean gave a second time, all the way, and Daxus's leg simply stopped being a thing he could stand on, and the whole vast weight of the second fist came down. A Dreeg on the ground was a different animal than a Dreeg on its feet. All that mass, all that reach, all that certainty, it was built to loom, to bring the crest and the arms down on a thing beneath it, and the moment the ground came up to meet it the design failed, because it had never once in its life had to fight from below. Vok said the runt was behind Daxus before the second fist finished falling, 1 knee in the broad back, the coil of high-tension load line off her thigh and around the thick throat in a single motion that Vok's eye could not break into parts, and then she was not choking him. That was the thing Vok kept saying. She wasn't choking him. That would have been slow. She didn't have slow. She had crossed the line behind the crest and set her weight, and there was a sound like the fabricator's cutting note, short. And then Daxus was not a problem anymore, and it had cost her 1 held breath. Vok and the 3rd Dreeg had their boarding guns up by then. In the open concourse, 40 feet of clear deck, this should have been the end of her 2 guns, a human with a load line, no cover. Kest shut his eyes and could not keep them shut. She was not where the guns were pointed. She had gone off Daxus sideways, low, behind one of the concourse's structural pillars, and the first burst of Dreeg slugs sparked off the plate where she'd been, and the second burst chased her and hit the pillar, and she was already at the base of it doing something Vok didn't understand until it was much too late. She got the cutting driver into the pillar's service panel, into the concourse's own bones, and Kest understood with a lurch that she was reading the station the way she read everything. That she knew this room the way she knew the pump lines, that the pillar carried the arcade's overhead light bus, and she had just cut it. The concourse went black. And in the black, a human who had spent 2 years on the deep heat lines, who worked half her shifts by feeling crawlways too hot for lamps, who had been raised on a world where the dangerous hours were the dark ones and her whole line had survived them by being the thing that saw in the dark better than the thing hunting it. In the black, she was home, and the 2 Dreeg were blind. Vok fired at muzzle memory and hit nothing. He heard the 3rd Dreeg grunt and fold somewhere to his left, a wet mechanical sound and then quiet. He heard the load line hiss. He backed up, and put the medbay wall against his spine so nothing could come from behind, and he swept the gun across a darkness that gave him nothing. And he did the thing no Dreeg in the history of Clan V Harkle had done on the Sump, which was call out, high, the pitch climbing, the prey sound, the sound the arrangement was built to make other things make. "Where are you, where?" "Here," the human said next to his ear from the dark, flat and quiet, and Vok's gun was not his anymore. She'd taken it up and out of his hands the way she'd taken the ankle leverage against a joint, and she put him down against the medbay wall hard enough to keep him and not 1 degree harder, because Vok, she decided in some cold, instantaneous accounting, was going to live, was going to be the one who carried it back, was necessary. And she crouched over him in the dark with his own gun and said, "You were in the room. When he killed the boy, were you going to stop him?" "No," Vok whispered. "No," she agreed. "Stay down, stay here. You're going to tell them what this was, not the crew, they won't hear it, the rest of the rock. You're going to tell the rock exactly what happened here tonight in order, and you're the only one of the 3 who gets to." She stood. Somewhere Kest got the emergency lighting up, dim and red, and in it she was a small filthy figure with a Dreeg boarding gun held wrong, held like a tool, not a weapon, because to her it was only a tool, and Daxus and the 3rd were down and still, and Vok was alive against the wall, and the whole thing had taken, from the boy's death to the red light coming up, less time than it takes a slow clerk to decide not to file something. She did not look at the 2 she'd put down, she looked at the ship. "Kest," she said, not loud, knowing the gallery pickup would carry it up to him. "Boy's name was Baz, 20, off the pump crew. He sat outside a hurt farmer's door in the dark because he thought somebody ought to. Put that in first, before any of the rest of it. Put the boy in first." "I will," Kest said over the pickup, his voice cracking. "Ren. Cut the bus when the fab stops," she said. "Not before. I'm going up the spine. I want them warm." And she went into the dark toward the pad, toward the hauler, at the pace of a thing that has decided something, and Kest lost her to the cameras at the spine gallery hatch, and after that he had no eyes inside the Dreeg ship at all, and what he learned of the next hour he learned, like everyone, from Gaul. Gaul was at the wall when the medbay alarm reached the ship, and he was at the wall when Vok's account of the concourse did not, because Vok was against a wall in the dark, unable to move, and no one had come to find him. And so the crew of Clan V Harkle stood at their breaching frame facing the front hatch, 40 strong and keyed to a fever, entirely unaware that their second fist was dead on the concourse, and the thing that had killed him was already inside the hull above their heads. The high fist felt it before he knew it. Gaul saw the old commander lift his scarlet crest and turn it slowly, the way a Dreeg turned it to taste the air of a room, and Gaul saw the crest do the thing his own had done in the market, the thing no Dreeg admitted to. It flattened for half a beat, tight to the skull, the old prey response surfacing in the oldest and hardest of them, and then the high fist forced it up again by will and said, "Daxus. Where's Daxus?" And no one knew, and that was when the fabricator stopped. It did not wind down. It stopped mid-note, the way a heart stops, and the sudden absence of the sound that had run every night for 6 months was louder than any alarm. The hold lights guttered. The great fab in its cradle went dark and dead, and the boarding guns that were charging on its rack stopped charging, and the breaching frame that ran off the same feed sagged half-built, and every fabricated thing in the hull that had been trickle-feeding off the station bus went, all at once, onto whatever reserve it carried, including the arm. Kest had cut the bus. Somewhere up in his office on the human's word, the slow clerk had reached out one steady limb and taken back the one thing that was his station, his feed, the power the Dreeg had clamped to and drunk from for half a year as though it were theirs, and turned it off, and 40 Dreeg in a dark hold felt their war go slack in their hands. "Reserve," the Hyphist said into the dark, his voice still huge, still holding. "It's the runt. She's cut our feed. It doesn't matter, reserve holds the guns an hour, hold the wall, she has to come through the—" She did not come through the front. She came down out of the spine gallery, into the middle of them from above in the dark, and Gaul, who had positioned himself at the back, at the edge, because some animal part of him had spent 8 days quietly preparing to not be at the center of whatever this became. Gaul heard her land, a small soft sound in the black behind the whole crested weight of the crew, on the wrong side of the wall they were guarding. And he understood that the Hyphist had built his entire defense to face a door she was never going to use, and that the number that had made Clan V. Harkle feared across 3 sectors had just become, in the pitch dark of their own hold, exactly the thing the runt had said it would become on the pump deck. A crowd, a traffic jam. 40 guns that could not fire for terror of hitting each other, in a space too tight and too black, with something small and silent and entirely at home moving through the middle of them. Gaul could not afterward put the next hour in order, and he came to understand that this was itself the point, that the human had not fought the crew so much as taken the order away from them, taken the sequence, the thing a Dreeg needed most, the clean arc of a fight with a shape you could see. In the dark of the hold there was no arc. There were only fragments, and the fragments came out of the black in no order at all, and a crew that had never once been made to fight without being able to see what it was hitting came apart along the seams of its own certainty. He remembered the first thing being a light, not hers, theirs. Someone near the front panicked and fired, a wild burst at a sound, and the muzzle flash lit the hold for 1/100th of a second, a white stutter, and in it Gaul saw the whole crew crested and bristling and swinging their guns at each other's shapes, and did not see her at all, because she was already low, already moving, already past the place the sound had been. And the burst that lit the hold hit 2 of the crew, because that was what 40 guns in the dark did, and the 2 went down screaming, and now there was Dreeg blood in it, Dreeg screaming, and the crew's own fire had opened the account before the human touched anyone. He remembered the load line, the thin high-tension line the deep-heat crews used to sling loads. He heard it more than saw it, a hiss and a hum out of the dark, and a crewmate near him simply left, yanked off his feet and up into the black of the spine gallery and gone, one short cry cut off, and Gaul understood she had strung the line through the gallery grating and was using the ship's own height against them, taking the big ones up and out of the fight one at a time from above where their guns were useless. And the ones who fired up after her hit the hull and the grating and each other. He remembered a crewmate beside him swinging a gun stock at a shape and connecting with meat, and the meat being another crewmate, and the 2 of them going down in a snarling heap of mistaken violence, and neither of them being her. He remembered the Hyphist's voice, still huge, still trying to hold the shape of a battle that no longer had one hold formation, back to back, don't fire, find her, and the voice being the only fixed point in the dark, and understanding with a cold, sick certainty that the voice was a beacon, that she was letting the Hyphist call the crew together precisely so that they would gather, so that 40 would become a knot, a mass, a crowd in the dark all facing outward, and that she was somewhere inside the knot they'd made, and that a knot of 40 terrified Dreeg with guns, packed shoulder to shoulder in the black, was not a defense. It was a thresher, and she was the only thing in it that knew which way the grain went. He remembered running. He was not proud of it, and he did not pretend otherwise later, when he told it. He was 19, and he had 1 finger bone on his cord, and the hold had become a thing out of the oldest Dreeg stories, the dark full of screaming and his own crew's guns eating his own crew. And Gaul did the thing the whole species had bred itself for 100,000 years to never do. And he broke, and he ran, back and low, and along the hull toward the maintenance hatch at the stern that the cruise map didn't have because it was the station's and not the ship's. The hatch he'd only known about because he'd been the one sent to seal it when they berthed, and had done it badly, and had never told anyone. He got the hatch open, and in the spill of dim red emergency light through it, for one moment before he went through, Gaul saw her. She was in the middle of the knot. She was small and filthy and moving, and there was blood on her that was hers. A dreeg slug had opened her along one shoulder and another had laid her scalp back over one ear and her left arm wasn't carrying its share. And she was not fast anymore, not the impossible concourse fast. She was hurt and slowing and paying for every motion. And she was still, in the middle of 40 of the deadliest things in the sector, the calmest object in the room. She had a dreeg's own boarding gun in her good hand, held like a tool, and she was not spraying it. She fired it once, twice, chosen, into the knot at the shapes that were still trying to organize, at the crest flares that meant a crewmate had found the will to lead, taking the will out of the crowd one decision at a time, and the rest of it she did with her hands and the line and the ship's own dark, and every dreeg in that hold outweighed her 4-to-1 and it did not matter. It had never once mattered, because the fight they knew how to have was not the fight that was happening. Gaul went through the hatch. Behind him the hyphist was still calling the crew to him, still gathering the knot, still certain that mass would answer her, and Gaul, going out into the cold station dark, understood the last thing, the thing that finished it. The hyphist was not calling the crew to defend the ship. The hyphist had stopped thinking about the ship. The hyphist was calling the crew to him because the hyphist, for the first time in a long, violent life, was afraid. And a frightened thing wants others around it. And he was pulling his whole crew into a knot around himself for comfort. And she had known he would, because the survey had known. Because 400 years of watching had taught the thing she was that the surest way to gather a terrified pack was to frighten the one at the center of it. He'd built her a room. Without meaning to, calling for formation in the dark, the hyphist had assembled his entire crew into one tight blind mass around the one target she actually wanted, and handed her the walls. Gaul ran into the station dark and did not stop until the sounds behind him stopped, and it did not take as long as 40 against one should ever take. And when it was quiet, he pressed himself against a cargo pillar with his crest flat and his single finger bone rattling on its cord, and he wept, which Dreeg did not do, and he waited to find out what had come out the other end of the dark. Inside, at the center of the knot he had made, the hyphist of Clan V. Harkle found himself, at the end, alone. Not all at once. That was the cruelty of it, the thing he had done to 100 beaten enemies and had never once had done to him. It happened one crewmate at a time, the mass thinning around him in the dark, the crests that had ringed him going out one by one down, or fled, or simply gone silent, until the hyphist stood in the red-lit ruin of his own hold with his fabricated arm and no one at his back at all, and the small human in front of him. The arm was slow. Kest had been right about the arm. On reserve, with the station bus cut and the trickle charge gone, the fabricated limb had dropped into a low-power crawl, the great actuators dragging, the three-fingered hand closing at a fraction of its speed, and the hyphist who had lifted his own weight one-handed off a gantry with that arm, who had ended things across 3 sectors with it, who wore the whole history of his violence on it in little bones, swung it at the human, and it came around like a thing underwater, and she stepped inside it. Under it, the way she'd stepped inside Daxes's reach in the market, and it closed on the air where she'd been. She was hurt. She was slow too now in her own way, bleeding from the shoulder and the scalp, her left arm hanging. But she had one thing left that the hyphist did not, and it was the thing she'd had the whole time, the thing the survey had filed its warning about. She was not finished. She had absorbed the boy's death and the slugs and the long dark hour and indexed all of it, and she was still, cold and quiet, settling the account and the Hyphist, vast, scarlet-crested, running out of arm, was, for the first time in his life, the one who wanted it to be over. "Runt," he said, and his huge voice had a crack in it now, the crack Vox's voice had had against the wall, the crack that ran under everything on the Sump. "Enough, enough. You've the crew's done, you've made your take the bug and go, take him. I won't clan V Harkles off this rock by the next cycle. You have my word as. You take limbs off things you end," Ren said. She had gotten around the slow arm. She was behind the shoulder of it now, on his blind side, and her good hand had found the mount, the fabricated seam where Dreeg engineering had bolted the weapon to what was left of the Hyphist's real shoulder, the coupling, the joint, the place the design admitted a limit, and Kest, piecing it together later from Gaul and from the state of things found after, understood that she had read the arm the way she read every made thing, in a single pass, and found the 2 or 3 points that mattered. And that a mount was only a coupling, and that she broke seized couplings for a living. "Beaten things heal," you said. "Ended things you keep." Her voice was very quiet now and very even, and there was blood in it but no heat, none, not 1 degree. "I'm not going to end you. That's the part you won't understand until you've had a long time to think about it. I'm going to beat you, and then I'm going to keep a peace, which is a thing you only do to the ended, and you're going to walk around for the rest of your life being the one exception to your own rule, the beaten thing somebody kept a piece of anyway, and every creature that ever hears the story is going to understand exactly what that means." She set her weight. The cutting driver was in her good hand in the mount seam, and the load line was cinched around the great dead arm above the elbow, run up and over the gantry, taking the weight. "The bones on the cord. Those aren't yours. You took them off things that didn't get a say. I'm taking the whole arm, cord and all, and I'm giving them back to the record, so somebody can read out every name you hung on yourself and put you in it at the end, as the one who finally paid." "You can't," the Hyphist said, and it was almost a plea now, the huge thing gone small. "That arm is that's my, you can't take a Dreeg's." "I already asked you once to take a foot off my friend," Ren said, "and you didn't, so I took the foot off it. This is the same thing. You've got your," she found the survey's word, the human word, flat, trophies on the wrong arm. She drove the cutting driver through the mount seam, and set the load line, and turned the whole dead weight of the fabricated arm the way it did not want to go, against the coupling, against the joint, against the one point in all that Dreeg engineering where the design had admitted a limit. And the mount that had borne the Hyphist's own weight off a gantry gave, the way the ankle had given, the way the coupling gave, the way everything gave when something small and patient, and entirely without heat, set its weight against the place where the strong thing had stopped bothering to be strong. The arm came off in her hands. The Hyphist went down, not dead. She'd been exact about that. The mount was a machine seam, and what was under it was cauterized old scar. He would live. He would live a long time. That was the entire point, down onto his knees in the red-lit ruin of his hold, one-armed, unmade, the vast scarlet crest gone flat at last and staying flat, and he made a sound. It was not a Dreeg sound. It was not the fire laugh or the status snarl or the huge holding voice. It was the sound the Sella had made in the market on the first day, high and thin and wet. The sound of a thing that has had something inside it bent the wrong way. The sound the arrangement had been built to keep on one side only. And it came, at the very end, out of the Hyphist of Clan V Harkle, alone in the dark, while a small hurt human gathered up his arm and all his stolen bones against her chest with the same terrible gentleness she'd used to gather her crippled friend, and turned her back on him as though he were furniture, and walked out of the hold toward the light. Kest had the pad cameras back. The ship's hull cameras were dead with the fab, but the station's own eyes on the berth still worked, and so did the concourse gallery pickups, and so, for the last part of it, did the eyes of the entire Sump, because by the time the Dreeg ship's main hatch cycled open, half the rock was standing in the arcade in the red emergency light, drawn out of their quarters by the alarms and the silence and the thing that everyone somehow already knew had happened without being told. The hatch opened, and out of the dark of the hauler into the red light came the human. She came slowly, because she was hurt. Kest could see it now on the wide camera, the shoulder, the scalp laid open, the arm she wasn't using. The way each step was a decision paid for, but she came at the same pace she'd done everything all week, the unhurried, settled pace, and she did not come out empty-handed. She carried the arm. She carried it against her chest with her good arm the way she'd carried Seth out of the market on the first day. The great black fabricated limb of the hyphist of Clan V. Harkle, longer than she was, the three-fingered hand hanging slack, and along its forearm the cord of little bones, the finger bones and crest spurs and jaw hooks of everything the hyphist had ended across 3 sectors, clicking softly against the plate as she walked. She had come off a ship of 40 carrying the one thing on the whole rock that had meant this is what happens to you, and it meant nothing now. It was just a heavy dead machine in a small hurt person's arms, and every creature in the arcade watched her carry it out and understood, all at once and without a word, that the arrangement was over. She crossed the concourse. Nobody parted for her the way they'd parted for the hyphist. Parting was a thing you did for a threat, and this was not a threat. This was something else. This was the rock's own held breath walking through the middle of it, and she came to the open space under the dome, the same open space where 6 days ago Daxus had put a boot on her friend, and she stopped, and she looked around at the silent ring of faces in the red light, Amat and Vetch and Sella, and the rest, all of them. The whole cowed history of the Sump, standing in a circle watching, a bleeding human hold a commander's severed arm. And she set it down. She did not throw it, she did not brandish it. She bent, slowly, hurt, and laid the arm down on the deck in the center of the ring, gently, the cord of bones settling with a small final rattle, and she straightened, and she wiped her good hand on her ruined coverall, and she said in the flat, quiet voice to no one and to all of them, "There's a boy in the med bay who died sitting outside a hurt farmer's door because he thought somebody ought to. His name was Baz. Somebody should sit with him now. He shouldn't be alone in there." That was all. That was the whole speech. Not one word about the arm or the ship or the 40 or what she was. She'd carried the commander's arm across the whole rock and set it down, and then talked about a dead pump hand who'd wanted somebody to sit with a farmer. And Kest, up at the rail with the tears running down his mottled hide, understood that this was the thing. This was the whole thing, that she had not done any of it for the arm or the win or the fear it would put in them. She had done it for the boy and the farmer and the idea that a thing could be done for no reason, and the arm on the deck was just the receipt. Then her legs went. Not dramatically. She simply sat down, hard in the middle of the ring next to the arm, as though the deciding was finally finished and there was nothing left holding her up, and Allo the Vetch bleeding himself, one arm useless, was already crossing the concourse to her and behind him, and the ring of the rock's people closed in not to threaten but to help, 100 cowed creatures moving all at once toward a small hurt human, and that motion, Kest thought, that was the arrangement ending, right there, more than the arm. More than the ship, the rock moving toward the one who'd been hurt instead of away from her. "Seth," she said to Allo as he got to her. "Is Seth the alarm Daxus got into the—" "Seth's alive," Allo said, getting his good hand to her shoulder to the wound pressing. "You stopped it, he's alive. Hold still. Hold still, you've lost, you should be dead, do you understand? Whatever you are, you should be dead, hold still." "Okay," Ren said, and this time the word didn't mean a figure confirmed or a tap opened. It meant only that she was very tired and that the account was empty and that she could at last stop. Her eyes found the arm on the deck beside her, the cord of bones. "Kest," she said, not loud, but the whole silent dome carried it. "The bones. Don't let them get thrown out with their names. Somebody's names. Keep them for the record. Read them out, all of them." "I will," Kest said, over the pickup, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. And the human closed her eyes in the middle of the ring, under the dome, with the commander's arm beside her and the whole rock bending toward her in the red light, and let the vetch work, and did not make a sound. Vok told the rock what had happened on the concourse because she'd told him to, and because he was too broken not to. They found him still against the med bay wall where she'd left him, unhurt and unable to move, and when they got him up he did not run for the ship. There was no ship to run for, not anymore. He stood in the arcade among the crews he'd spent 6 months terrorizing, and he told it, all of it, in order, the way she'd instructed, starting with the boy. How Daxus had gone to kill a crippled grower in his sleep. How the pump hand had stood in the door. How the human had come across the dark and taken the 3 of them apart with a load line and the station's own lights, and had chosen, in the middle of it, to leave Vok alive for exactly this, to be the one who carried it back. She could have killed me, Vok said to the ring of faces, his crest flat, his huge frame diminished. She had my own gun on me in the dark. She put me down soft, you understand, because she'd already decided I was going to stand here and say this. She planned that I'd live before she'd finished the fight. What kind of thing plans who lives while it's still? He stopped. He did not have the words. None of them did. Kest had the words. Kest had 147 of them, and a summary line, and a designation, and he had promised twice now to read them out, and near dawn when the assessor came, he did. Because the Sump did not exist in a vacuum, and a Dreeg crew did not simply cease to hold a conquered way station without the conquered noticing. The distress protocols Kest himself maintained had fired automatically the moment the station bus was cut. A bus cut on a berthed hauler tripped a hazard flag 3 sectors wide, and a conquered assessor vessel that had been running a nearby lane diverted and clamped to the Sump's second berth by the turn of the watch, and out of it came the assessor. A 4-armed scholarly elite of a species Kest had only ever seen in survey documents, pale and long and precise, an official of the great slow catalog itself, come to find out why a graded way station had gone dark and why there was a Dreeg crew in pieces in its hold. The assessor's name was MilitarySciFi, and MilitarySciFi wanted, above all things, to understand, because that was what the species was for. And it stood in the arcade in the gray dawn light coming up through the dome, over the fabricated arm still lying where the human had set it, and it looked at the small, unconscious human being tended on a med slab in the middle of a protective ring of the Rock's people, and it said, to the assembled crews, in the flat, toneless, conquered trade camp, "Explain to me what happened here, one of you. Explain what did this to a crew of 40. And 100 creatures who had spent 6 months not seeing anything looked at the floor, because the habit was that deep, and the silence stretched, and it was Kest, the clerk, who saw everything and had spent 11 years being seen to see nothing, who came down the gallery stairs on his own legs and crossed the arcade to stand before the assessor of the great catalog, his mottled hide, for once, holding its color. "I'll explain it," Kest said. "I've got the file, you'll want to hear the file." He read it out in the gray dawn, standing over the commander's arm, to the assessor of the great catalog, and to the whole Rock, and it was the first time in 11 years that Kest, seeing everything, had a voice. He gave them the designation first. He put it up on the arcade's public board off his own reader, the entry he'd copied in the rust-colored dark 6 days before, so they could all see it. The human homeworld, catalogued by the Conquered's own slow instruments, graded on the survivability index at a band Kest had had to look up because he'd never had reason to read it. Grade Harrow, the top band. The world so hostile the survey's models said no persistent tool using life should arise on them at all. "Read the number," the assessor said, very quietly, because the assessor's species knew the Harrow scale the way Kest's species knew the freight tables, and the assessor had already seen the number and did not, for a moment, believe it. "Harrow 9, Kest said. "The only entry at Harrow 9. In 900,000 graded worlds, there's one line at the top of the top band, and it's hers." He let that sit. Around the arcade the crews who did not know what the Harrow scale meant looked at the crews who did, and read it off their skins and their stillness, and began, slowly, to understand. The numbers in the band don't measure the world. They measure how far past the model's own limit the world's life went anyway. HFY is a world that made something that shouldn't exist. HFY is where the survey stopped extending the scale, because nothing kept climbing past her people, so there was no point in more numbers. He gave them the advisory next, the class of warning he'd never seen before or since. Do not contract for hazardous labor. Do not test. Do not provoke. And then he gave them the summary line, the judgment the Conquered's 400 years of watching had finally settled on, and he read it slowly, once, and then a second time because the assessor asked him to, and because the whole rock needed it twice. Threat behavior in the dominant persistent life form is not reactive but deferred. The organism does not answer a provocation. It absorbs it, indexes it, and settles it at a time and in a manner of its own choosing, typically after the provoking party has concluded the matter closed. Kest looked up from the reader, at the arm on the deck, at the small hurt human on the slab in the ring of the rock's people. Field observers are cautioned that apparent de-escalation by this organism should be read as scheduling. The assessor of the Great Catalog was silent for a long moment. She let the crew stand at their wall 3 nights, MilitarySciFi said at last slowly, working it through with the whole precise apparatus of a species built to understand. The hyphist set a date. She agreed to the date. She de-escalated, and the survey would have read that as scheduling. Kest said, yes. And she came early. She came the night his second fist broke discipline and killed the boy, not before. She'd have kept it clean, gone up the spine, cut the feed, taken the arm, walked out, and maybe nobody but the hyphist would have had to. Kest stopped. But they killed the boy. So she stopped being careful. You saw the hold. The assessor had seen the hold. The assessor would be a long time not seeing the hold. 40, MilitarySciFi said. A Dreeg crew of 40 off a hauler that cleared 3 sectors. And it was done by, the assessor looked at the slab, at the small filthy shape under Alo's hands, and something happened in the pale precise face that Kest had no name for but recognized, because it was the same thing that had happened in his own hindbrain in the market on the first day, the thing older than cities. By one of them, a young one, a laborer, not a soldier of their kind, you're certain. Not a trained pump crew, Rhys said from the ring, rough. He had not left the human side. Deep heat rigger, 2 years on contract. I trained her myself on couplings, not on that. Nobody trained her on that. That's just, the old foreman's voice caught, that's just what's under it with them, with all of them. You scratch a human and that's what's under it, and mostly you never scratch deep enough to find out, and these fools scratched all the way down. He looked at the assessor. You want to write something in your catalog? Write that. Right, they'll dig ditches and run your pump lines and take your worst rotation without a word, for years, quiet as anything, and you'll think that's what they are. And it is what they are. It's just not all of what they are. The rest of it only comes up when you put a boot on something they've decided to keep. MilitarySciFi wrote it down. Kest saw the assessor's 4 hands moving over the recording plate precise and fast, and understood that the entry for HFY had just gained its 148th incident, and that this one would have names in it, the boys, the growers, the clerks, the crews, the hyphists, and that it would be read in the great slow catalog by assessors Kest would never meet for a long time, and that it would say what the human had wanted it to say, which was not she is dangerous. Every entry said that. This one would say, it did not work. They put a boot on the small soft thing and it did not work, and here is exactly how it failed, in order, starting with the boy. The mask the whole galaxy had been letting the humans wear, the quiet laborers, the contract crews, the small ones who took the worst rotations and went home in 2 years and never followed you. The mask did not so much drop as get taken off and set down, once, deliberately, on a nothing rock at the edge of a nothing lane, in front of a 4-armed clerk of the Great Catalog who would carry the memory of it into every assessment he made for the rest of a very long scholarly life. Clan V. Harkle had wanted a lesson delivered to an audience, They got one. It was just not the lesson and not the audience they'd had in mind. The Concord took Clan V. Harkle's remnant into custody, which is to say the assessor's vessel had the capacity and the authority, and the surviving Dreeg had neither the numbers nor the will to argue. There were fewer of them than there should have been and more than Kest expected. The dark and the panic had done most of the crew's dying by the crew's own guns, and the human, it emerged, had killed far fewer than the story would later claim, because the story always claimed more. She had disabled where disabling held and killed where it didn't, with the same cold economy she brought to everything, and the tally that the assessor eventually filed was smaller and stranger than a battle's. A crew of 40 reduced, over 1 hour in the dark, to a broken handful, most of the reduction self-inflicted. The epicenter a single unarmed laborer who had gone in to take one arm and leave. They found the hyphist on his knees in the hold where she'd left him, one-armed, alive, exact. He did not resist. He did not speak at first to anyone. Kest saw him brought out across the concourse in the gray light, the vast scarlet-crested bulk of him gone gray itself somehow, the crest flat and staying flat, and the whole rock that had lowered its eyes for 6 months watched the hyphist of Clan V. Harkle carried past in conquered restraints, and not one creature lowered its eyes, and Kest thought that might have been the worst thing that had ever happened to the hyphist, worse than the arm, that the rock looked at him now openly. The way you look at a thing that has been beaten and kept. Later, when the assessor questioned him, the hyphist said only one thing that anyone repeated, and he said it not as a boast or a threat, but in the slow, bewildered voice of a creature still trying to understand the shape of the thing that had ended him, a shape he could not see because it did not have the shape of a fight. She asked me to take a boot off a bug, the hyphist said. That was all she wanted the first day. I could have taken the boot off the bug. He looked at his shoulder at the cauterized seam where the arm had been. I've ended 1,000 things. Not one of them ever asked me for something small first. If I'd known the small thing was the whole, he stopped. He did not finish it. He never finished it, in any account Kest ever heard, and Kest came to believe the hyphist genuinely could not, because the sentence ended in a place. A Dreeg's mind was not built to go. The understanding that the entire catastrophe had been available to him, at no cost, as a courtesy, on the first day, if he had simply been the kind of thing that could take a boot off a farmer when a small, quiet person asked him to. Gall they found at dawn at the stern hatch he'd fled through, crest flat, the single finger bone on his cord, 19 and unable to stop shaking. He did not run from the assessor. He told his part plainly, including the running which he did not spare himself, and including the 8 days of knowing a thing and saying nothing, which he spared himself least of all. And at the end of it, when the assessor asked him, the way the assessor asked everyone, cataloging, whether he had understood at any point what the human was, Gall said the truest thing anyone said in the whole aftermath, truer than the file, truer than the summary line. I understood in the market on the first day, Gall said. When Daxus hit her and she didn't make the sound. My crest went flat and I didn't know why, and I've spent 8 days learning why, and here's why. My crest knew what she was before I did. The oldest part of me knew. It's the part that remembers being small, a long time ago, before we were the ones who did the hitting. She woke it up. He looked at his single finger bone, at the trophy cord he had been so anxious to fill. We stopped being the small thing so long ago we forgot the small thing could be the dangerous one. She reminded us. I'm never going to forget it again. None of us are. That's his young flat crest. That's what she was. She was a reminder. They buried Baz on the Sump, because there was nowhere to send him and no time to send him there, and because the rock, for the first time in anyone's memory, wanted to. There was no ground on a dug-in station. What they had was the reclamation lock, the cold outward hatch where the Sump gave its dead back to the moon, and the pump crew rigged the boy in a hauler tarp, and re-said the few words a foreman knows, the words for crew who don't come home, and the strange thing, the thing Kest logged in the record because it had never happened before, was that the reclamation lock, which usually saw a handful of a dead creature's own kind and no one else, was full. Amat and Vetch and Sella and the rest, the whole cowed history of the rock, came and stood for a 20-year-old human pump hand they had mostly never spoken to, because he had sat outside a hurt farmer's door in the dark for no reason, and because a small hurt human had said, first thing, before the arm, before any of it, somebody should sit with him. He shouldn't be alone in there. Ren was there. Alo had wanted her on the slab and she had come off it against his advice, held together with seal strip and a shoulder brace, and the transfusion of 2 pump crew volunteers whose blood her body would tolerate, and she stood at the reclamation lock small and gray and swaying and would not sit. And when Ree finished the words, she put her good hand flat on the tarp. Once, the way she'd put it on Seth's shoulder in the first hour, and she said nothing at all, because there was nothing in her that made speeches. There never had been, and the not speech was louder in that cold lock than anything the assessor's catalog would ever hold. Afterward, when the lock had cycled and the boy was given back to the moon, she found Vok. The Dreeg was in conquered restraints by then, waiting with the remnant for the assessor's ship to take them, and Ren walked over to him on her own unsteady legs, this small broken human to the vast broken thing that had been in the room when the boy died, and the whole arcade went still watching it, because no one knew what she'd do, and half of them wanted her to do something, wanted the blood, wanted the account settled the loud way. You told it right, she said to Vok. You started with the boy, thank you. And that was all. She turned and walked away, and Vok stared after her, and Kest saw the Dreeg's flat crest and understood that Ren had just done to Vok the cruelest and cleanest thing she could have done, crueler than killing him. She had thanked him. She had shown the whole rock that the human who took a commander's arm did not bother to hate the ones who'd only watched, that they were beneath the account, that the worst thing she had for Vok was courtesy, and Vok would carry that courtesy the rest of his life, the way the hyphist would carry the arm, as the mark of a thing that had been weighed by something cold and found not even worth the settling. The story went out from the Sump the way stories do, faster than the assessor's careful file, carried on every hauler that clamped and unclamped at the pad, and it grew in the carrying, the way these things grow, by the 3rd telling she'd killed all 40, by the 10th she'd walked through their guns untouched, by the 20th the arm had been the hyphist's real arm, and she'd taken it with her bare hands. Kest heard the versions come back around, months later off passing crews, embroidered past recognition, and he stopped correcting them, because he came to understand that the embroidery did not matter. The core survived every telling undamaged, because the core was the only part that had teeth. They put a boot on her friend for fun, and she came back carrying the commander's arm. Everything else was decoration. That one line went out across the sectors intact, and it did a thing the assessor's file could never do, a thing the survey had spent 400 years failing to do with all its careful language about deferred threat behavior and scheduling. It made the small, quiet human at the next dock, the pump hand, the contract laborer, the one taking the worst rotation without a word. It made that one, everywhere all at once, a thing you did not put a boot on. Kest thought that was probably what she'd wanted. He never asked her. She was not the kind of thing you asked, and anyway he thought she'd have said, in the flat voice, that she hadn't wanted anything except to close the account and get Seth to green water, and that the rest was just how the record read once it was read out loud, and that other people could make of it what they made. She healed slower than she should have and faster than a body that hurt had any right to. Alo kept her on the slab 4 days and she kept getting off it, and on the 5th day he gave up and let her convalesce upright the only way she'd accept, which was sitting in the med bay next to Seth, the two of them on the bench they'd always shared, the small hurt human and the smaller crippled grower, saying nothing much, the way creatures do when the silence between them is already full. Seth was walking by then, careful, the splinted forelimb held against him, the fine grafting hands stilled forever, and his 4 eyes calm about it in a way they had not been the first day. He had had time now to take the measure of what he'd lost and set it down, And he had watched, from the med bay door, the whole rock come to a human boy's burial, and he had heard the story going out on the haulers, and Kest thought the grower had arrived somewhere the first day's grief hadn't been able to reach. "You almost died," Seth said on the bench on the 6th day. Not an accusation, a fact he was still turning over. For a grafting cripple who can't even ren, you almost died taking an arm off a thing that could lift its own weight one-handed. For me. "I didn't do it for the arm," Ren said. "I know what you didn't do it for." The grower's throat light pulsed a slow, steady blue. "I'm asking what it was for. You keep saying the boy and the record and it not working. But you went up that spine before Baz died. You'd already packed the tool roll. You were always going, so it wasn't only the boy." The 4 small eyes found her. "What was it for really? Say the real one you can to me." Ren was quiet a while. Outside, faintly, the pad thrummed with the Fen hauler's pre-departure checks, 2 days early, because the assessor had cleared it to sail as soon as it was ready, and the captain saw no reason to wait on a rock with a dead crew in it. "When I was small," Ren said at last in the flat, quiet voice, but there was something under the flat now, something she let Seth hear because it was Seth. "On the colony world before I was the small thing. There was it doesn't matter. There was a version of the Hyphist where I grew up, smaller, just a man. And he put a boot on something I loved for fun because he could, because nobody where I was could afford to be the one who moved. And they all just didn't see it. The whole settlement practiced not seeing it the way this rock did. And I was too small to move, and I've spent," she stopped and started again, cold, "and even I've spent a long time being the size where I can move. That's all this was, Seth. I finally got to be the one who could afford it. You don't waste that. You don't get to be the size where you can afford it and then practice not seeing." She looked at her friend. "You brought me a warm root once. No, you brought the clerk one, but you'd have brought me one. You're the kind that does things for no reason. I wasn't going to let this rock turn you into cargo for the crime of being the one clean thing on it. That's the real one. That's the whole real one." Seth put his good forelimb very lightly over her scarred hand on the bench, and the two of them sat and said nothing much, and the silence between them was already full. The Fen hauler sailed on a gray morning, and the whole pump crew walked Seth to the berth, and so did half the rock, because the rock did things together now that it had never done before, and Kest logged the departure himself off the harbor console with his hide, holding its color the way it did most days lately. The captain of the Fen ship was a hard old bird of a species Kest didn't have a name for, all beak and gray feathers and a reputation she'd protected for 40 years. And she looked at the small, crippled grower coming aboard, and then at the small, hurt human walking him to the hatch. And she knew the story. Everyone on every hauler knew the story by now. And she did a thing that told Kest the story had already done its work out in the wider dark. She came down her own ramp, which captains did not do, and she inclined her gray head to the human, a bow, small and precise, and she said in trade cant, "The grower rides fed and watered and safe to green water on my deck under my name, and any crew that troubles him answers to me, and then I'd guess to you." She straightened. "It's an honor to carry your friend, Rigger. I'll not have it said the Fen line was the ship that let you down after." "He's not cargo," Ren said. It was the same thing she'd said to Alo on the first day in the med bay over the boys over Seth's sleeping face, and Kest heard her say it and understood she'd been saying it the whole time, to everyone. The entire arc of the thing folded into 3 flat words. "He carried a warm root up 3 flights to a tired clerk once for no reason. Feed him well. He'll graft you rough seed stock better one-handed than most do with 2. He's worth the whole rest of your manifest." "I don't doubt it," the captain said, and meant it. And that was the thing, she meant it, because the story had made a grower who couldn't graft into a thing worth a captain's bow, had reached out across the sectors and changed what a crippled Sella was worth. And Kest thought that was maybe the largest thing the human had done, larger than the arm, larger than the crew. She had made her friend valuable to strangers by refusing to let him be worthless to the rock. Seth stopped at the top of the ramp, He turned, careful on the splinted limb, and looked back down at the small human on the pad, the two of them, the last time, the human and the grower who'd shared a bench and said nothing much. "Come see the green water someday," Seth said. "When your rotation ends, 3 jumps. There's sun there, real sun on real tanks. I'll graft you something that only grows in the light." His throat pulsed a deep, steady blue. "You were the one clean thing on this rock, Ren. You know that. You keep telling me I was. It was you. It was always you." "Go on," Ren said gently, before she changes her mind about the fair, and the not smile touched her mouth. But it was not the terrible one this time. It was the small, real human one. The one she'd shown Kest in the office the night he agreed to cut the bus, and Seth saw it and carried it aboard with him. And the hatch cycled shut, and the fin hauler unclamped from the sump and lifted off the pad and out through the dome lock into the rust-colored sky and was gone, out toward the green water, 3 jumps. Fed and watered safe. Ren watched it go until it was nothing. Then she went back to work, because her rotation wasn't over, and there were pump lines that needed running whether or not a person had recently carried a commander's arm across a concourse, and the deep heat crew was short a hand now, was short young Baz, and the lines didn't care about any of it. The lines just needed running, hot and dark and by feel, and she was good at that. She'd always been good at that, and she went down into the heat and ran them. The assessor stayed 9 days, cataloging, and on the last of them Kest did the thing the human had asked him to do twice, the thing he'd promised over the gallery pickup with the tears on his hide. He and MilitarySciFi read out the bones. They laid the hyphist's fabricated arm on a bench in the harbor office, the great dead black limb with its cord of trophies, and they cut the cord, and one by one they took the little bones off it, the finger bones and crest spurs and jaw hooks, dozens of them, a rosary of everything the hyphist had ended across 3 sectors. And the assessor, with the whole catalog at its 4 hands, ran each one against the conquered's records of the missing and the dead. The endless quiet ledger of things that had gone out on a lane and never clamped anywhere again. And where a bone matched a record, they read the name out, into the assessor's plate, into the great slow catalog, so that a thing that had been reduced to a knuckle on a killer's arm became, again, a name, with a world and a crew and a date it had last been seen alive. It took a long time. Not all of them matched. Some of the ended had never been missed by anyone who filed, which Kest found the saddest thing of all, a bone that was a whole life and no record anywhere of the life. But many did, and the assessor read each match into the catalog, and appended it to the 148th incident of the Hero9 file, under the human's name, so that the record would show not only what she'd done but why the arm had been worth carrying out. Because it was covered in stolen names, and she'd given them back. She could not have known this would be possible, MilitarySciFi said at the end, holding the last unmatched bone, its 4 hands still. That the trophies could be traced, that the names could be returned. She simply said the bones were names and to keep them for the record. The pale, precise face turned to Kest. She did not do it because it would work, clerk. She did it because it was owed. Your foreman was right. That is the thing the survey has spent 400 years failing to write down about them, not that they are dangerous. Everything dangerous is dangerous. It is that they will spend themselves settling accounts that were never theirs to settle, for things that cannot pay them back and call it nothing, and go run the pump lines afterward as though they had not, an hour before, been the most terrible thing in the sector. The assessor set the last bone down, gently, with the matched ones. I have graded 900,000 worlds. I do not have a number for that. The scale does not go there. Perhaps it should. Kest kept the empty arm. The assessor let him. It was evidence technically, but the assessor filed it as return to station of incident, and Kest suspected the pale scholar understood exactly why the clerk wanted it. He kept it in the harbor office, the great dead fabricated limb, stripped of its bones now, hung on the wall above the console where he saw everything, and on the shelf below it he kept the dried husk of the warm root the grower had brought him a lifetime ago, and the two things together said, to anyone who came up the stairs, the whole of it, without a word. The sump changed after. Not all at once and not into anything soft. It was still a dug-in or transfer rock at the edge of a nothing lane, and hard things still came through it, because hard things go where the lanes go. But the arrangement did not come back. No crew clamped to the pad and decided the rock was soft and simply stayed, because the story got there first now on every hauler ahead of every crew. This is the rock where they put a boot on a grower for fun, and the small human came back carrying the commander's arm, and the whole record got read out with the names in it. Crews still came through hard. They did not come through certain. And the difference between hard and certain, Kest came to understand, was the whole difference between a rock with an arrangement and a rock without one. Gall did not go into custody with the remnant. The assessor, cataloging, found no crime on him but the running and the silence, and neither of those was a thing the conquered jailed for, and so Gall was set loose on the sump with nowhere to go and a single finger bone on a cord he could no longer stand to wear. He cut it off, the cord, the first day. Kest watched him do it from the office window, the young Dreeg standing alone on the concourse, cutting the trophy cord off his own harness, and holding the single finger bone a long time, and then not knowing what to do with it, because he had nowhere to put a name back. In the end he brought it up to the harbor office, up the 3 flights, and stood in the door not knowing how to ask, and Kest took it from him without making him ask, and ran it against the catalog, and found the vetch it had belonged to, and read the name out and appended it, and gave the young Dreeg the one thing he'd come up 3 flights hoping for and could not have named, a way to give the name back. Gall stayed on the sump. He worked the pad eventually, loading the haulers he'd once terrorized, and he was quiet, and his crest stayed mostly flat, and he did not talk much about the 8 days he'd known a thing, and said nothing except once to Kest late when he said, "She was going to be a reminder whether I spoke up or not. But I could have been the one who told them, and I wasn't, and I'll carry that. That's mine to carry." And Kest, who had buried 100 cruelties in a clean record over 11 years and had finally once refused to file one, said, "I know, I carry one like it. You get to where you can carry it. You don't get to where you set it down." And the young Dreeg and the old clerk sat with that, the two of them, and said nothing much, and it was enough. Wren finished her rotation. 2 years, the contract said, and the contract did not care what had happened in the middle of it. And when the 2 years were up, she rolled her tools and drew her hazard pay, most of it still there. She'd only ever spent it on one thing, and she stood on the pad one gray morning waiting for the hauler that would carry her off the sump toward wherever a deep heat rigger went next. Ree saw her off. So did Kest and Alu and Gall and a fair part of the rock, because the rock saw people off together now. "Green water's 3 jumps," Ree said. "Your friend's there, you could." "I could," Wren said. "Maybe I will, not yet." She looked out at the rust-colored moon, the dug-in station, the pad where a Dreeg hauler had once sat certain it had all the time in the world. "There's other rocks, other arrangements. I keep finding out I'm the size where I can afford to see them now." She shouldered her tool roll. It was the same roll. The pry bar and the cutting driver and the coil of high-tension line, the tools of a rigger, the tools of the other thing too, the same tools, because to her they had always been the same tools. "Take care of them, Ree. The small, clean ones. When one comes through and does something for no reason and the rock starts practicing not seeing it, don't practice. You're not the size to move, but you can refuse to not see. That's a thing even the soft ones can afford." "I'll refuse to not see," the old foreman said. "Go on then, girl, keep the room." The hauler cycled its ramp. And Kest, watching the small, grease-smeared human walk up it, ordinary, unremarkable, the last thing anyone should ever trust, 25 years old now and utterly without heat, thought about the survey and its 400 years and its careful language about deferred threat behavior, and about the arm on his office wall stripped of its stolen names, and about the boy given back to the moon, and the grower safe in the green water, and he understood that the catalog had it exactly backward. All of it from the very top of the top band on down. They had graded her world for how hard it was to live there, and called the thing that came off it a threat, and filed their warnings, and missed the whole of it. Because the small human going up the ramp had not come back carrying a commander's arm, because her world was hard. She'd come back carrying it because somewhere on that hard world, a long way down under the quiet and the pump grease and the flat, even voice, her kind had decided that the small, clean thing that does something for no reason is worth spending yourself to the last cold drop to keep, and that a boot put on it for fun is an account, and accounts get settled, at a time, and in a manner of the settler's own choosing, long after the ones who opened them have concluded the matter closed. The ramp cycled shut. The hauler lifted off the pad and out through the dome lock into the rust-colored sky, and Kest watched it until it was nothing, and then he went back up the 3 flights to his office, where he saw everything, and he sat down under the empty arm and the dried root, and he did not file a single thing that day, and no one made him, and that, more than the arm, more than the crew, more than the whole long story going out across the sectors, was how he knew the arrangement was gone for good. She hadn't raised her voice once. That was the part he'd tell people at the end when they asked what she'd been like. Not the arm, not the 40. She never once raised her voice. She just quietly stopped being a thing you could put a boot on, and made a whole rock stop being one too, and then she went back to work.